Looks like we're good to go. Midoriya took a step back and checked his handiwork, a series of large boxes and times that consisted of their schedule for the week, with empty spaces for writing inside each box time. It wasn't pretty, but it was straightforward enough. Midoriya quickly checked the time then turned around, quickly counting what people were here and which weren't all while still ignoring Eraserhead. Alright everyone, please look at the board. Eraserhead, move out of the way. On this board is our schedule for every day. Midoriya stepped back and out of the way, pointing to the things he wrote on the board as he spoke. We're moving back when you start because it's a stupid time to start it, but that's not the point. We'll start tomorrow at 6:30, so I expect you to be up and have eaten by then because breakfast is important. Lunch will be at 12:10 and dinner will be at 6:40ish. Any questions on that front, specifically about meals, Arrow? Hey, can we still stop to eat like today? Those are some long spaces between meals. Yes you can and yes they are. We'll try this schedule out but it's not concrete. I encourage you to eat on these breaks. Midoriya tapped the times listed on the board above the boxes, hour-long blocks with 10-minute breaks. But you can eat when necessary. Good question. Anyone else? A moment of quiet as he scanned the scene before he continued. Alright, I'm supposed to be teaching you but I can't be everywhere at once. These hour-long blocks are one-on-one time with me. You don't need to sign up for them at all if you don't want, and you can sign up for multiple, but please give everyone a chance to get at least 1 hour before you sign up for a second session. Any questions? It was pretty quiet as he looked around the room, smiling. Alright, it's already. How time flies. It's 3 o'clock right now. First lesson for today starts at 3:20, sort out among yourselves who gets what slot. The time slots were 6:30, 7:40, 8:50, 10 o'clock, 11:10, break for lunch at 12:10, start back up at 1 o'clock, 2:10, 3:20, 4:30, and last lesson at 5:40. From there they'd go to dinner and have free time. Gave them plenty of time to go to bed and get ready for the next day, plus, they'd only bet 10 or so minutes late compared to the normal classes. Seriously, how did UA expect students to function without any breaks? The weird thing with the regular schedule was the breaks, or to be specific, the lack of any. Even the military gave soldiers a chance to breathe throughout the day, small breaks to rest so they didn't hurt themselves. The regular schedule here though didn't even include lunch. No planned breaks and barely any supervision. It was a mess and a waste from start to finish. Wraith scoffed as he moved away from the board, giving the students a chance to pick their time slots while he rested. He expected Kaminari to take probably 5 of 9 slots, Kirishima to maybe take 1, and a wild card to take 1. This would leave him 2 slots, but he at least offered them. Couldn't say he didn't try. Oh yeah, Mina and Zero. You should probably pick slots right after a big meal if you want one. Something he forgot to mention, but hey, better late than never. Wraith sat down in a spare seat, shuffling his shoulders as he took a minute to finally breathe and think. Holy shit, he fought Bakugo. He fought Kachonen. Calm the fuck down. Wraith snapped him out of memory lane before he could even get deep into it, shaking off the cold sweat before it could start. He fought Bakugo and won. He could remember Bakugo's hand on his face as it generated heat, but he still had won twice. He turned Bakugo's super move against him and pulled out 2 victories. Plus, he hadn't even been going all out. What could he do if he went all out? They could do a hell of a lot more. With their gear like the AEC and Yamato, they could easily take on almost any hero in the world. All he needed to do was say the word and Wraith would push them to their limits and show off what they were capable of. No walls, no stops. All he had to do was say the word. Midoriya was shaken out of these thoughts by someone poking him in the head. Hey Tilda, Ken, right? Ragdoll, the third of the wild pussycats because he never got around to formally meeting Tiger. He was around here somewhere, but Midoriya hadn't had the time yet. But that was Tiger, and he was dealing with Ragdoll interrupting his brief respite. Unlike Eraserhead, neglectful asshole that he was, he didn't really have any bones to pick with Ragdoll. He didn't like or dislike her, she was just another professional hero at the same place as him. No point in being a dick to her, then. Yes, I am Ken. Ragdoll, correct. Do you need something? Yup, kind of. Just want to talk to you. Ragdoll sat on the desk in front of him, and Midoriya was too tired to bother moving away. He'd just keep giving half-assed answers until she left him alone. Nezu brought you into this, right? Midoriya nodded as he relaxed in the chair. He just got back from fighting for over an hour with barely any real breaks, he really wanted some time to sit back and rest. But here he was, stuck responding to another fake with no hope of getting some real rest. Damn. Wow, Nezu asked us to help too. Ragdoll said it like it was amazing, but given that they were using the Pussycats Forest for training that was pretty obvious. Midoriya shuffled slightly in his chair, trying to get comfortable as Ragdoll continued. Are you a teacher? You seem to have a good idea what to do with kids. Treat them with respect, help them as needed, and look out for them. Same as civilians, heroes, and villains. That isn't a teaching trick, it's basic logic. Well, he said respect, but there was one of those 3 groups he couldn't respect. Idiotic fakes like her always pissed him off, and he couldn't bother to give them a shred of respect. They didn't respect him, he didn't respect them, so at least it was 2-way. Would have felt worse if it was one-sided. Whoa Tilda, are you a hero then? Why did everyone think he was a hero? There are careers other than professional heroism, miss. Wraith rolled his eyes as he leaned back further, lifting the front 2 legs of the chair off the ground until he hit the wall. I've never been a hero, and I don't think I ever will be. Ooh Tilda, oh. Her enthusiasm was finally curbed, probably from realizing she was talking to someone beneath her. Damn fake. Anything else? Wraith opened one eye to glare at her as he spoke, seeming to cut straight through her with just a glance. If she could have seen his eyes beneath the bandana, anyway. Not really Tilda, thanks for the conversation. Ragdoll smiled but didn't move, seeming content just to stare at him. As long as he could rest though, he didn't care. Wraith closed his eyes again and tried to get what little respite he could. Ragdoll peered at Ken, getting more familiar with him as she firmly identified who he was with her quirk. It was made much easier by being close to him and focusing all of her attention on him, but since she was acting as security for everyone she couldn't focus all her attention on him. That left being close to him and that wasn't hard at all. Now she sat just a few feet from the quiet old man. He wasn't loud, but he was really quick with words. Cutting her off and giving small speeches at the drop of a hat, his teaching qualities shone through no matter what he was doing. Which made her want to get into his head more. She scanned the area for any disturbances one last time, making sure everything was fine, then focused in on Ken. She'd only take a minute tops, but she wanted to learn more about him. It was a habit she picked up with her quirk, checking the weaknesses of new people she met. She'd already checked the students when she sat down with them while they were resting and also the other teachers. All that was left was this old. The world seemed to darken and shift as she stared into him, maintaining a steady stare while she locked onto him. Everything else got darker and darker, then darker. And darker still. It was dim. There wasn't usually a lot of light here, but this was so dim she had a hard time seeing anything. She could barely see Ken's form in front of her as she looked around in her mind's eye, trying to find where the light was coming from. Usually, the lighting was a strange dim form that vaguely hovered over everything, but in here there was barely anything. No, there were things in here. Lots of things. The floor was wet and littered with strange objects, but all of it was dim. It was like there was a wet fog, chilling her to the bone when she touched it. But none of this was real, none of it could be touched. The cold was literally just her mind playing tricks on her, or more aptly, Ken's might playing tricks on himself. Wasn't that a little weird though, to imagine yourself like this? It was a weird headspace. Turning back, Ken was gone completely and replaced by a shaded figure. It was the same person, they were definitely wearing the same coat, but he seemed older, tired, beaten. His breathing was ragged and slow as he sat in the midst of the fog and objects, leaning forward. His face was hidden by the dark. Was this his weakness? One of the problems of her quirk was interpretation, like this. What did a really dark wet place mean? Was this his deep secret? His greatest fear? A dark memory SSSSSSHLICK. What was that? Ragdoll suddenly turned, peering deeper into the darkness. Something was moving in here. That hadn't happened before. PLP, 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 PLP. Steps across the wet landscape, slowly approaching. She really should go, but intrigue held her tight like a vice. Ragdoll looked over and past the dim shape that was supposed to be Ken and saw vague shapes in the dark. They wavered and stretched like reflections in water. PLP, PLP, PLP. A strange man to the left, wrapped in cloth, lay on the ground. His face was covered by a strange mask like some kind of demon, barely visible as he hunched over like an animal. Heavy breathing was the only large movement he made, but his muscles were tense and twitched like a panther about to pounce, eyes underneath the mask fixated onto her. PLP, PLP. To the right, a broken and beaten man barely left standing. He was crouched, wearing something vaguely like Ken's own coat, and wearing a strange helmet with no detail save for the cracks in it, half of it shattered of the man's face. His ragged breathing as the blood dripped from him matched the animal to the left as he clung to the sword in his hand, seeming to be held together only by sheer willpower that was fading fast. PLP, PLP. Taking a step back, she started to recognize the shapes in the dark fog. Weapons of every kind stuck into the ground, some old, some new, all broken as they radiated out from the thing that lay beyond it all. Bodies lying on this wet ground with the smell of iron. The smell of blood. Everything in this place was broken, shattered by one thing that lay deeper into the depths. It peered out of the dark at her. A white skull, smiling as it stared straight through her as she did to others. Its eye sockets were deep and dark, seeming to consume what little light was left in here. The skull bobbed as it approached across the wet ground, stepping on the bodies of others as it approached silently, devoid of sound beyond the wet sound as it stepped through the blood and crushed the bodies. Its body was a dark mass in an already dark mess. Its body was sleek and sturdy, moving steadily through the slippery conditions straight towards her. Its face was devoid of emotion as it approached, save for the twisted smile carved into it. There was just the sound of its steps. No breathing, no words, just its slow steady approach. But this was how it normally was. Ragdoll shook herself free from this weird momentum and took a second look at this place. Definitely seems like a bad memory. So that means you're Ken. She crouched down to check out the fallen man, the one on the right who had a jacket pretty similar to Ken's. This was probably a younger Ken. He looked like someone had beaten him unconscious, nearly leaving him dead, but he wasn't dead yet. His hair was missing the gray and looked very dark in the poor lighting. It didn't even look brown, so maybe Ken's hair got lighter when he got older. The guy on the right made no sense. It was like someone crushed him underfoot, but who was he? White hair, tons of scars, and now that she took a second glance at him he had a massive club tied to his back. Couldn't be Ken. Ken didn't have that much white hair. So who was this? And most of all, who are you? She approached the final one. Now that she was looking closer, he hadn't slowed down because he wanted to, but he slowed down because of some massive fuck-off chains on his body. There were only 5 or 6, but they were pretty big and rusty as they wrapped around his limbs, pulling him back. You must be really restrained. Repressed memory. Dark past. Ooh, I know. A secret identity. The middle figure had reached a stop as it was at the end of its chains. Now, up close, she got a better look at it. A pair of swords at its hips along with a chain. An armless coat with large arms ending in claws. Both arms were chained back, along with their legs. Seriously, the more you know, the less scary it is. She took a small walk around him, trying to get a guess as to what he was. It was completely silent now. He really startled her at first, but now he was just like a statue. Not moving, not even breathing. Wait, where's the breathing? Everything was completely silent now, but earlier. Ragdoll took a step back and stared at the animal, who lay flatly on the ground. No longer moving, breathing, or doing anything as it stared out with dead eyes, another body in a sea of corpses. The old guy like Ken. His sword laying on the ground, another weapon for the collection that dotted the landscape in front of the limp figure. The willpower that kept him afloat had run dry, it seemed, and he'd given in to the inevitable. Creak. Her attention shifted back to the middle figure, the only one left as she started to walk backward. It slowly raised that skull face again and peered through her with eyes no longer dark, 2 pits of purple fire in its face as it stared straight through her. She walked into Ken's body and fell backward into the mess of bodies and weapons, feeling the blood splatter on her. It was still warm to the touch and sticky as it clung to her. The final figure shuddered as it took another step towards her, dragging its chains further and further forward. Closer and closer to Ken. The monster's eyes blazed with light as its gaze remained fixed, but not on her. It was locked onto the crouching and weak Ken as it trudged through the bodies, steadily approaching. It was no longer silent as it approached, each step loud as it forced its way forward through the muck. The fog seemed to radiate off it as its eyes glowed, illuminating this hunting ground. Ragdoll couldn't think. She couldn't speak. She couldn't move, couldn't do anything as it came closer and closer. This was nothing like usual, this was nothing like her hero training. This wasn't a villain, this was something straight from hell. It loomed over everything as it advanced, emitting some strange rumbling as it moved. It seemed to shake the ground as it spoke with a voice that couldn't be heard, slowly and painfully dragging its arm down to its belt and grabbing one of the swords on its belt. She scooted backward, trusting that those chains would keep it back. She completely forgot that this was an illusion. It was too vivid to be. This wasn't like a dream, it was some kind of nightmare. Everything here seemed to reject her as it grabbed the sword, slowly unsheathing a strange sword with no sheath. Its blade was like smoke, the same fog that littered the place and coated all the other bodies. It took a final step and reached the end of the chain, just a few feet from her as it towered over everything, sword drawn over its head. Yes, it was stuck. This was just her quirk, she couldn't be harmed. She was just getting scared of nothing. Kriak. The chain was tugged on as the monster pulled against its chains, eyes locked on Ken. Its mouth creaked open, speaking slowly with those massive jaws and fangs. You're fake. Just a part of my imagination, no, a part of Ken's. This isn't. Her words seemed to piss it off as it suddenly surged forward, pushing the chains to their limits again. Kriak. Its voice echoed across the wet plains as it spoke again, louder. It leaned forward, seeming to finally reach the limits of its chains as it hadn't taken another step forward since it started talking. It could pull all it wanted, but it couldn't get any closer. You're not real. Ragdoll remembered where she was, who she was. This was just her quirk, nothing her could harm her. Crack. The chain snapped as it lunged forward, cutting straight through her shoulder and through the bone. The pain was vivid and her body felt hot as she screamed, but all was overpowered by the monster's voice. Chapter end notes. What a fun happy chapter with fun times all around. So glad I didn't decide to do anything stupid like put two versions of the same song done by the same fucking artist, you idiot. Ahem. Well, that song's my favorite for Wraith. Covers his dynamic pretty well I think, but I dunno. I wrote this shit so I'm biased. But anyways, on to the chapter. Covering the schedule for a fun time at a fun camp. So glad it's gonna last more than one day and isn't going to get wrecked immediately because of the League of Villains attack. So glad I didn't have to waste a few hours trying to plan out a good schedule knowing damn well it isn't going to matter. So glad the League of Villains knows that UA has second and third years they can attack. For the love of God, League of Villains, just look at that. Second years for once. So this was a fun time with a chance to kick back and relax. Definitely nothing bad happens later like an idiot author putting two versions of the same song in the same chapter. For fuck's sake. But besides that, I really wanted to show off the mentality behind the monster as its restraints get removed and I knew Ragdoll's quirk was a thing. Once again, not a clue how the quirk is supposed to work in canon but it's overpowered as fuck, so I did my own take on it. When Ragdoll was first brought up a lot of people seemed to think her quirk would reveal his real identity, but that's not his weakness. Hell, he gave up being Midoriya for a solid week and was fine. A better idea was that it'd show his mom or someone he's close to, but while that's a close second it's not really his biggest weakness. I'd say nothing comes close to his biggest weakness as he is. One of the fun parts is trying to imagine how Ragdoll's quirk worked for that last scene, and I ripped off a comic that I can no longer find. Usually it shows her a still image of their weakness behind them, as if they're hiding it. Midoriya, however, is starting to show his weakness and is no longer hiding it. Plus, his weakness isn't a thing. It's an action, so it can't really be shown in a still image. But saying anymore is saying too much. Gotta be vague and mysterious. I've spent enough time cringing and patting myself on the back, time to bail. Adios. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe tilde. Chapter 133. Chapter summary. Fun times in a fun place with fun people. Fun. ... I think I've made this joke before. Chapter notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Midoriya sat inside the classroom given to him for teaching exam F, still trying to get comfortable while the students picked who was going to be stuck with him. He wasn't giving the students a lot of attention during this break, or to the two heroes in the classroom that were staring him down, but instead focused on himself again. He was tired after all the fights and just wanted a little peace and quiet. His chair leaned against the wall as he closed his eyes and closed out the world, breathing slowly and deeply as he tried to regain his focus and energy. Was this why Eraserhead was always looking so tired? It couldn't be, they were tired from hard work. That fake never did any hard work and just sat back while others did everything. Wraith grit his teeth at the thought, peeved. These fakes masquerading as heroes pissed him off. Like the idiot in front of them, Ragdoll. What was she supposed to be doing here? She made it sound like Nezu asked her for help, but she wasn't helping anyone right now. She hadn't been helping anyone for as long as Wraith had seen her dumbass, instead sitting around with Eraserhead while he examined the aspiring fakes and frauds. Wraith opened one eye, staring straight through that idiot in front of him. She stared ahead like some kind of corpse, but she was a very different creature from Wraith. Wraith had died because he experienced so much and it broke the weakling. Raggedy Ann here looked like she never experienced a real fight in her life. No real muscle on her and a hero outfit that looked like it belonged to some perverted cafe. In a real fight, it'd kill her in one cut. Slash across the body, cutting through the shoulder and body in one slash. She'd enter shock in a second and bleed out in a minute, completely helpless to stop it. The monster glanced across the room, examining each of these idiots with sheer logic. Most were going to die in their first real fight. Mina, Sato, Monoma, and Zero. They had fine quirks, sure, but beyond those quirks they had nothing, and they barely knew how to use those quirks. Kirishima was the worst, a total idiot who made no effort to better himself. He'd survive his first fight easily, but he'd never do anything. He'd be stuck using his quirk and swinging his fists like a fucking animal from his first day to retirement, then he'd get to tell stories to everyone about how he didn't do anything. What a life. Then there was Bakugo. Powerful. Too powerful. And he wanted even more power. He lacked control and restraint. He was smart, but he wasn't logical. Most of these brats would die in their first fight, but Bakugo was definitely going to be the cause of his own death. The monster's dead eyes locked onto their only real student, Kaminari. The rest had nothing but praise for the kid, but no one was perfect. Kaminari didn't react well to pressure and wasn't inclined to think things through. Another student that was likely to be the cause of his own death, but the big difference was he was willing to improve himself. That was, objectively, his only real upside. Kaminari was actually kind of shit with the sword. His footwork was passable, and that was the thing he was most skilled with. He lacked the muscle, coordination, or brains for complicated maneuvers. He either didn't think at all and charged in or pulled back too much, choking himself and making his fighting worse. However, with only the ability to try and improve, he was leagues better than his classmates in the monster's eyes, and even better than his teacher. Where had they days gone when they'd fight to improve? When they had become powerful, the fear of morals replaced the fear of death. Weakness had been allowed in. In becoming stronger, they had become weaker. Their once ironclad morals came into question. Once they would never question what they needed to do, they knew it in their hearts. No matter what logic or moral said, it had to be done. Even now the weakling still knew what he wanted. But indecision had cut them down. That indecision needed to be cut out. Choices need to be made, and they couldn't keep hesitating. The weakling knew what he wanted, but if he didn't step up, the monster would let logic dictate the course. The weakling wanted to make a decision. Then he'd need to show that spirit heroes always talk about and make one. He needed to face the truth, that he wanted. Ah! Ragdoll screamed as she suddenly tipped backward and grabbed her shoulder, scooting backward while breathing heavily. The entire room shifted to look at her in confusion as Midoriya sprung to his feet. Ragdoll, are you alright? Are you in pain? Midoriya looked over the shoulder she grabbed, but there were no signs of injury. Maybe it was a phantom wound from a long time ago. Ragdoll. Her eyes were wider than usual and her breathing was heavy. She was staring into the distance like usual, but she seemed more jittery as she clutched her shoulder and slowly collected herself. Midoriya grabbed her and held her in place so she didn't hurt herself and kept speaking loudly. Ragdoll, look at me. Are you alright? He just said basic and easy things to try and figure out where her head was. She looked at him, so either she was listening to him or she instinctively looked at whoever grabbed her arms. Either way, she seemed to be mentally present, so there was one problem gone. Ragdoll blinked a few times as she caught her breath, looking around slowly. Yup, I'm alright. No, you're not. Wraith could feel the cold sweat covering her arms. There were many things it could have been, but they didn't know her regular attitude well enough to guess the problem. It could have been a panic attack, heart problems, or some other pre-existing medical condition. The other pussycat would probably know, they were rescue heroes. This was their job. Eraserhead, do you want to look after my class or Ragdoll? Eraserhead looked like he was going to try and worm his way out of it, but Wraith's fierce glare held him in place. I'll look after the class. Kaminari, get one of the pussycats quickly and bring them to me. I'll be in the front room with Ragdoll. Wraith lifted the civilian up and off the table and carried her outside without leaving room for discussion, moving to the front room and setting her down inside one of the chairs, leaning her back to the best of his ability. He then stepped back, finally listening to whatever it was she was saying. I'm fine, really I don't. Approach me. Wraith held up one hand and gestured to her to come forward. If you're fine, get out of that chair and approach me. Ragdoll put her arms under her, but she couldn't seem to muster a lot of strength. She might have quickly come down with something, but that didn't explain the shoulder pain she seemed to feel when she screamed. Maybe it was an old wound that got infected. Perhaps this was the fault of a quirk, and they tried to disable her because she could monitor a lot of people at once. Then we need to check up with everyone and make sure no one's missing. Midoriya didn't even try to look surprised when she couldn't get up, then glanced up as Mandalay came in. Good, she was the best pussycat since she could talk to everyone at once. Mandalay, something happened to Ragdoll. Tell everyone to come in quickly so we can do a head count, something might be happening. Alright, Mandalay didn't even need to concentrate as she probably sent out the message. Midoriya wasn't sure because she didn't send it to him and instead focused on Kaminari. Kaminari, get back to the classroom. The fewer people running around right now the better. Gotcha sensei. Kaminari ran back to the classroom and left the two heroes alone with the vigilante. Midoriya watched the kid run off and shook his head, then refocused on the current scenario. Mandalay was looking over Ragdoll who seemed to be rapidly improving. Mandalay caught his confused glance and started talking. She seems to be in shock, but there's no real harm. She'll be fine in a minute. But I don't know why she's in shock. It usually requires a lot of pain or stress to go into shock, it's not something that just happens to people randomly. She was sitting on a desk and staring into the distance before she went into shock. She wasn't doing anything at the time. She hadn't even been really staring at him, instead staring straight through him like she was interested in the wall behind him. But that's what she normally looked. They'd done their part, it was time to get back. If you need any help, just ask. Mandalay could speak to anyone within a mile or so. Getting a hold of them would be easy, so there was no reason to stay where they weren't needed. Wraith bowed briefly and left the professional to deal with her business while he dealt with his. It was time for lessons to resume, but first, he'd make sure everything was alright with the students. Ragdoll was fine, technically. She only needed a few minutes to catch her breath and refocus. If she was in actual danger or stress there might have been some more complicated things that came next, but her shot seemed genuinely random and that made no sense. Mandalay watched Ken leave before refocusing on Ragdoll, who was laying down limply. So, what happened? Were you attacked by some quirk, or did you get too deep? Ragdoll had a bad habit of trying to look into random people she met, and once she spooked herself when she met a serial killer. She had also recovered quickly then, so Mandalay wasn't too worried about Ragdoll's overall health. Yeah, just went too deep. Ragdoll smiled faintly, but there wasn't much warmth in it as she rubbed her arms. It was hot and damp. That thing was so calm, it didn't even hesitate. What thing? Who did you get caught in? Ragdoll was usually staring through people and wasn't always fully in the moment, so it was hard to tell when she was acting distant and when she was acting normal, but Ragdoll was definitely still caught on something. Mandalay just didn't know what yet. The third teacher, the old guy. I stuck around in his head, just to see his weakness. Just a peek. Ragdoll tried to defend herself, but that was definitely a violation of privacy. It was kind of her fault. But the old guy's weakness did this to her. The serial killer's weakness had been his tendency to kill, obviously, because if that got out he'd be ruined. But all that had done was scare Ragdoll a little, it didn't send her into shock. What did you see in him that scared you so much? Quote. I don't know. Ragdoll's smile faded for a second as she thought back over it. It was dark and strong. He seemed to be running from someone. No, something really strong. Her hand grabbed her shoulder as she spoke, describing the scene. Then, it moved. I didn't know the scenes could move. They never did before, but that thing, it attacked me. It wanted me dead. It was scary. Now she was showing signs of shock again as she pulled into herself. It went straight for my head. I was so scared I couldn't move. I forgot where I was. I told myself it wasn't real. But I can still feel the sword in me. It's not real though, Ragdoll. You didn't get stabbed. You're here now and you're safe. Mandalay gripped Ragdoll's shoulders and gave her a reassuring smile, helping her calm down. It was quite unusual for most heroes to get scared of a villain, but it was more common with one type of hero. Recovery heroes didn't see a lot of fights, but even then. This sounded weird. Ragdoll's quirk didn't work like it normally did. Did that mean she activated Ken's quirk? But that meant Ken's quirk was pretty circumstantial, to only work when someone tried to get into his head. Did that mean something would happen to her if she tried to talk inside his head, some sort of feedback? While nothing physically happened to Ragdoll, she'd definitely need some time before she was calm again. All of this came back to one question. When asked directly, he deflected. Eraserhead and Vlad didn't seem to know much about him, so it made her wonder. Who was that guy? Seems nothing really happened. They got the all clear from Mandalay after just a few minutes. He'd have to check later to see what happened for the sake of the camp, not just his own interest. Something randomly taking her out was a bad sign for this camp, especially if it was because of a quirk. Well, time to get to lessons. Everyone, be on high alert for anyone suspicious. Report it to the teachers, then try to kick the shit out of whoever it is. These kids were probably going to try and pick a fight with any intruders they found, so at least Midoriya would tell them to get a teacher first. And since he was their teacher, that meant they'd get him and he could put a stop to anything before it went too bad. Hopefully. Yes, sir. The kids replied simultaneously and enthusiastically, proving to him that they were totally going to try and fight the intruder if they found one. Seriously, he just got done kicking their asses and they wanted to get into another fight. What if they met a real villain? These kids' inability to plan ahead was the stuff of legends, but they had other things to deal with. Namely, did anyone sign up for their next time slot? Midoriya stopped focusing on the kids as they headed out and looked at the board. With all 9 slots filled in. Didn't think this would happen. 6:30 was. Mina no, 0 was first with Mina crossed out. Even though it was a whiteboard. 7:40 was Kaminari, 8:50 was Kirishima, 10 o'clock was Sato, 11:10 was Kaminari, 1 o'clock was Mina for real this time, 2:10 was Kirishima. Then 3:20 was Bakugo. 4:30 was Kaminari, but most surprisingly, 5:40 was Bakugo again. He really didn't think Bakugo would sign up once, let alone twice. But, wait, 3:20, that meant, Midoriya checked the time. 3:22, Midoriya glanced out the window and shook his head, it looked like he had a long day ahead of him too. Barely got any rest because of Ragdoll's panic attack thing, but he was used to it. He was tough. Wraith walked outside to greet his students, nodding hello to each before arriving at Bakugo. Are you ready to get started? Bring it, old bastard, I'll take on anything you've got. Bakugo was confident in himself, of course. Wraith wondered how long it had been since Bakugo got a real fight. He was clearly excited to continue where they left off, so they might as well get to it. He made the schedule thing, so he probably should follow it himself. Very well, let's begin. Chapter and notes. Yo yo yagati yo, short chapter but it's done in one day, so that's gotta be worth at least half a penny. Probably, but for the chapter tilde. I think I've been praising Kaminari too much, so I wanted to outline some of his flaws in a chapter. Seriously, you can like a character, but do it too much and it starts to feel weird. I wanted to point out that Kaminari does have flaws, and nobody's better for that than the monster with his all facts no opinions approach, who also pointed out the sole reason they like Kaminari so much. Other stuff, just need to resolve last chapter's fun mental trip and set up what the next few chapters are gonna look like. Hope you enjoyed the schedule and it makes sense, cause I've got some scribbles on the back of a letter for the class schedule and I'm trying to make it clear. Did it work? Who knows? Short chapter, short notes. Adios. Chapter 134. Chapter summary. Finally some real-time skips. Chapter notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. What do you mean we're not fighting? Bakugo glared in confusion at Midoriya, but Midoriya was completely calm as they sat in the training area as he sat on one of the benches in the training area. Bakugo was standing as he lost his shit. Because there's no point in it. We're here to train, Bakugo, not to fight. Midoriya figured Bakugo would take himself off the lost immediately after finding this out, maybe not even waiting for this session to end. Bakugo always liked fighting, so it's probably what he signed up for. I'm taking this one-on-one time to make you a better hero, not so we can kick the shit out of each other. Oh yeah, like what? Bakugo scowled and kicked the ground, snarling like a dog, but Midoriya didn't seem to care as much. He beat this guy twice already without getting serious, after all. This wasn't elementary school, it wasn't middle school, and the distance between them seemed. Well, there was definitely a distance between them still, but now it was like Midoriya was up higher than Bakugo. It was weird, but irrelevant. Midoriya thought through the best way to explain what was going to come next because he explained this topic at least 3 times already and was kind of getting sick of his first metaphor. Midoriya pushed off the bench and grabbed his sword with his left, putting his thumb against the tsuba and slowly drawing his sword as he walked, only pausing to glance back at Bakugo. Focus. Midoriya walked to the closest tree, turning to make sure Bakugo was close enough to both listen and see him before he really got into the metaphor. He spun the sword a couple of times, adjusting to a one-handed grip and tapping his foot as he worked out his thoughts. Bakugo, you've got a lot of power. Most power in your class easily, right? Tisk. Damn straight. Bakugo even took compliments like a dig. Hey, now that he was looking at it from the outside, wasn't Bakugo kinda childish? That wasn't really relevant to anything, but it'd be fine, more future thought. You might have a lot of power, but it's unfocused. Messy. You have a tendency not just to beat your opponent, but to hit everything nearby while you do it. Midoriya reversed his grip on the sword so sharp edge was pointing towards himself now, then lined up next to a small branch low to the ground. I could explain how you might hit civilians, damage property, hurt your teammates. But you're smart. You already know that, so we're just gonna focus on focusing. What's that supposed to mean, shitty bastard? This side of the sword's pretty blunt, Wraith showed off the backside of Yamato, the side opposite the edge. He held it up so Bakugo could clearly see how flat it was. It's unfocused, it can't concentrate the power. I can hit things with a lot of strength. Wraith's arm seemed to flick as the blunt side of Yamato slammed sharply into the branch, making it shiver and move but not breaking it. But it doesn't go through. It's like when your attacks hit me, it just spreads it out and washes over the target. Wraith had walked through Bakugo's explosions without even dodging during their fight, showing off his bodysuit's full power. Against forces like heat and sudden blows, his suit was basically unbeatable so long as the attacks didn't come in too fast. This drove Wraith's point further home now and made Bakugo listen intensively. But when you focus it, you don't lose power by hitting unimportant shit. You focus it all into one point. Bakugo was narrating, but now Midoriya flipped the sword. Again his arm flicked as Yamato cleanly cut through the branch in a single strike. And it punches through the target. It's safer for extras and civvies, less likely to break random shit, and does more damage. To no one's surprise, 1A's best fighter was quick to figure out the perks of this kind of attack. Didn't explain why he didn't use them though. But how the fuck am I supposed to do that? Teach back quote. I don't know. Midoriya looked at him calmly and shrugged as he spoke. I don't know how you're going to do it, otherwise I'd tell you. Midoriya was honest as he explained that, for all his theories, he wasn't sure of how this was going to work. Of course, he did have some guesses, he studied this guy for like 10 years or something. But solid ideas? Fuck if he knew, he didn't even have a quirk. How was he supposed to know how to focus one? Then what are we doing? Wasting time. Right now, yeah. Midoriya sheathed his sword and walked back to the bench. But I hate wasting time, so let's get started already. Tisk. Saying all that shit, then leaving me to do all the work. Should I have known I'd have to figure it out myself? Bakugo started to turn away before he was stopped by Midoriya's hand on his shoulder. When Midoriya heard him saying shit like that, he stopped himself from going to the bench and approached Bakugo, his student. Figure it out yourself. Even if his face wasn't visible, his confusion and annoyance were palpable. Even if he was shorter than Bakugo, his presence transcended physical size. He seemed to stare through Bakugo as he spoke. Bakugo, I don't know what you've put up with so far, but I'm not going to sit back while you're doing all the work. Teaching and heroism are actions. You're only a teacher or a hero when you act like it, and I'm your teacher. The man's voice was more confident now, more solid as he was brought out. You signed up for time with me and I don't intend for you to waste a second, so sit down and let's get to work. Am I understood? Yeah, teach back quote. Slower Kaminari. Do it right, no matter how slow it seems. Keep that quirk up. Good work Kaminari, just a few more seconds. Midoriya spared with Kaminari in slow motion as Kaminari maintained his quirk, the two slowly dancing around each other as Kaminari worked on maintaining his concentration. Even now there were still a few flickers as Kaminari tried to maintain both the quirk use and his proper stance, moving in the correct form. But it wasn't just standing around. Midoriya stepped in and flicked his sword lightly forward, forcing Kaminari to raise his guard while maintaining that constant quirk use. He had to get used to blending the two with every motion, it had to become second nature for it to work well, and now Midoriya was forcing him to practice for long periods to get him used to it. But there were limits, like when Kaminari got too tired and started to show signs of electrocuting himself. They were very careful to watch for any signs of this and any time they found it, time. Good work Kaminari. Midoriya and Kaminari dropped the swords at the same time, Midoriya walking up and patting Kaminari on the shoulder. You're doing great Kaminari, and you're showing a lot of improvements since we started. How are you feeling about this? I think I'm getting it. Kaminari seemed very ecstatic as the two sat down for a brief break, grabbing drinks to rest up and cool off between training. But does that mean? Yes, we're moving on to a new thing for you. Midoriya smiled and nodded, but his reaction was muted compared to Kaminari's visible joy. He didn't always get Kaminari, but the aspiring hero's enthusiasm was admirable. He would be a great hero if he kept improving. But it was not the time to rush things. Finish that water and we'll get to it, but remember not to rush yourself, alright? Yethir I mean. Kaminari stopped chugging and put down the water bottle, then did a weird salute from his seated position. Yes sir. Midoriya smiled as he stood up, grabbing his sword and going over the motions for their next training. Now, how did he learn the drawing cut again? Crack. BRRRRRRING tilde. Ring tilde. And that's time everyone. Take a break. Midoriya turned off the alarm and faced Kaminari. How are you feeling about this new attack? Your step-in is solid, but you keep leaving out most of your upper body. The motion's really weird sir. Kaminari was using his real sword since the wooden practice sword didn't have a sheath, something that made the drawing cut much easier. Kaminari performed the attack to the best of his ability, dragging the sword out and swinging it across his body. I've done it so many times, but I can't seem to do it right. That's because you've practiced the wrong form for a long time. Kaminari had been using the drawing cut as part of the thunderclap and flash for how many months now? Since the exams for UA if Kaminari started it from the very first time Midoriya taught him. We're not just teaching you how to do it, we're correcting bad habits too, so it's gonna be more difficult than the last thing you learned. I don't think you should do this move without me there. It's not dangerous, but I can't supervise you and correct mistakes you make if I'm working with another student. Midoriya tossed the training equipment into the bag, then returned to the table as usual. Eraserhead had built distance when he realized he'd have to do some real work if he stuck around, and Ragdoll never came back, so it was just exam F in this part of the training grounds. The students seemed to enjoy the break as they stopped working for a second and congregated together. Even if they weren't talking to him, it was good to see that these kids were close and enjoying themselves. The way the world was shaping up, this might be one of the last times they really get to relax before the fall of All Might. Hey Sensei, if I just need you to be there to practice, can I do it after dinner? Kaminari burst into Midoriya's thoughts with his positive mentality, smiling as he walked over. Midoriya shook his head, pleasantly surprised by Kaminari's willingness to practice. Sure Kaminari, but remember not to overdo it. We've got a lot of work to do tomorrow too. Yes, Sensei yes here. Yes. Kaminari stumbled over his words a bit but got to something in the end and left to go be with his classmates. Now, looking around, all the students were in one space. But there were no other supervisors here. That usually was fine for him, those fakes were pretty useless after all, but he wanted to go find Ragdoll and make sure everything was secure. However, he couldn't because everything might not be secure so he shouldn't leave his students alone. Because he didn't know if this site was safe, he couldn't leave to find out if this site was safe. He could send one of the students in his place, but if this place was compromised then he'd be putting that student at risk. Plus, overall, it didn't really matter. He'd see Ragdoll at dinner and he was supposed to stay with his class regardless, so as long as he kept his eyes out and was careful it didn't matter if the site was compromised. But who the hell would want to break in and attack here anyway? It was just some campgrounds in the middle of bumpik nowhere with nothing interesting going on. The kids were mostly pretty stupid, the heroes sucked at harrowing, and he wasn't on the record books. Security was security, sure, but UA had state-of-the-art technology. This campground had trees for fuck's sake. If someone really wanted to know about it, they'd go into UA to steal the files of the date and location of 1A's summer training. It wouldn't even be the first time this year that UA had been broken into, but there were other dumber ways of finding out about this camp. Following the buses, getting someone with a locator quirk and picking one of the students, hacking into emails. Holy shit, it could have been easy. It wasn't like they changed buses partway, so if you just followed behind the buses while hidden shit was easy. Hacking into emails took more work, but if you were trying to attack UA you'd at least expect a little work. Then the last option, the quirks. That one depended on who was doing it and why, namely, was this the League of Idiots again? The League of Morons had All for One as a backer, so any options that required quirks were easy pickings. Fuck, forget the locator quirk. Just get a mind-reading quirk and use it on one of the teachers. This whole camp really was stupid. Kurogiri could sneak into any location and just listen in when they were talking because teleporters made for great thieves. This whole place relied on UA not getting broken into, and then it had none of the options to fall back on. If things got dicey in UA, so what? They were in the middle of Musudafu, just call in some local heroes and police as backup. Fuck, call All Might. Here, though, who the fuck was gonna help them if things went south? Wraith glanced at the clock, rousing himself from his thoughts. 3 more minutes. Well, it seemed UA didn't just fail at heroism and teaching, they also failed at basic security concepts. They really did go plus ultra on failing. Whatever the hell plus ultra meant. Midoriya started stretching, wondering who he'd teach next. Bakugo was supposed to be next, but he probably erased his name, so this meant he'd have a free slot next. Maybe he'd tell Kaminari, or maybe he'd just take a break. He was getting sore from all this constant work, but such was the life of a teacher. At least he'd get to supervise next Tilda. Teach backquote. I practiced focusing the explosion, come take a look. Bakugo stood in front of him and shouted at him to get up like an impatient child to their parent, eager to show off their trick. Come on geezer. Midoriya blinked, trying to process what was happening and failing utterly. After a few seconds, Midoriya took the easy option and just gave up, standing up and following Bakugo a safe distance, making small talk as they went. Did using your hands to funnel the explosion work? One of the ideas they came up with was using his hands to funnel the blast in a direction since his hands were resistant to his own blasts, but they couldn't really figure out how to do that. Bakugo had tried cupping his hands, which did focus the blast but it pointed the explosion straight at his own head. Needless to say, this was a terrible idea. They had left after proposing a bunch of ideas and trying out a variety of things but no real progress. Yeah, didn't hurt that much. Bakugo at least confirmed that the focusing thing had worked correctly as he flexed hands, then picked a branch as a target just like Midoriya had. He raised one hand like normal, pointing his palm at the branch, then formed a circle with his other hand and placed it against the palm. Focus the heat, aim, and... Tilde blam. Ha, I did it. The shot tore through the tree branch and blew it apart, knocking the branch to the ground and leaving it smoldering on the ground. Bakugo stood staring at it for a second as Midoriya approached, admiring it. It could use a lot of refinement, but for a start, this was pretty good. The second hand might need to be a little more closed. Maybe generate heat with both hands. Midoriya held up the branch and turned to Bakugo with a confident smile, holding up the branch. Great work Bakugo. You've done well. Bakugo didn't respond for a second, seeming to be taken back for a second before stepping back up and smiling. Damn right, now, time to improve it. You've created a new move, sure, but it's time to work out the flaws in it. We're only going 5 minutes this time so we can discover any underlying flaws, but 5 minutes is pretty long for a fight. Wraith ditched his coat and grabbed his mask as he walked into the forest. Try to use this focus blast as much as possible during the fight so we can find out how to improve it, alright Bakugo. Bakugo hung back for a second before smiling confidently and charging after him. Yeah, sensei. Try to keep up with me. Dozens of trees had strange burns and holes in them by the time the alarm rang for the last time of the night. The sun had already set behind the mountains, despite the early time of 6:40 in the summer, but best of all, they had done it. Bakugo stood tall, ready to fight as he faced down the tree. To his left stood Wraith, who silenced the alarm calmly. One last time. Get ready. Bakugo tensed his legs and got into his normal fighting position. Legs bent, hands slightly bent as he created a small string of explosions, and his body leaning forward. It was Bakugo's natural stance and a good fighting stance. But it wasn't good for this next attack. Now, get in position and fire. Bakugo's left leg came forward as his right went sideways, both legs planted firmly in the ground as a base for the explosive power. His hands quickly slipped into position as he leaned forward, anchoring himself against the explosion and kickback. His left hand, the hand that focused the blast, heated up in advance to serve as the funnel. Then, kaboom. The force was sharper as it punched a hole into a tree without damaging the nearby vegetation. A clean and powerful shot for strong opponents that didn't damage his surroundings, and all it took Bakugo was 2 hours of practice. Not bad at all. All in an hour too. Look how far you've come. Wraith gestured to the other trees that didn't have such clean wounds as they made their way back. Bakugo admired his past works with that cocky smile, already confident in his greatness. Course I've come far. Who do you think I am? A pretty good student. All in all, it had gone way better than Midoriya thought it would. Bakugo listened pretty well even if he complained about it most of the time. Well, as long as he could understand what you were telling him and why he listened. He was still a pain in the ass, just much less of a pain than Midoriya thought he would be. No shit I am. Bakugo said it well, screamed it like it was obvious. You're just not a shit teacher like that insomniac. Thanks, I think. Midoriya and Bakugo walked out of the woods together. Alright everyone, that's it for today. Go get changed and get some food. Finally. Beaten by a bunch of leaves. Sensei Tilda. Midoriya took a breath to calm his nerves then walked back into the mess as students ran everywhere, barely aware of the smile on his face. They might be a bunch of kids trying to become one of the worst jobs in Japan, but this wasn't too bad. The students had to cook their own meals as they met up and began to work, once again dividing themselves into their 2 classes naturally. They took this time to socialize as the exam F kids got to re-enter the main group, and Midoriya followed a roughly similar formula as he went up to the other heroes. So, did anyone ever find out why Ragdoll panicked? Was it the work of a quirk? Midoriya finally had a chance to settle his worries and went in straight away, directly asking Mandalay. If anyone knew what went wrong, it would be either Hero to Ragdoll herself, and since he couldn't find Ragdoll for some reason he went for Mandalay. Mandalay did respond, but she seemed evasive. Oh, it was nothing serious. Ragdoll just used her quirk badly and got some whiplash, it was her own fault. She's fine now. I see. I'm glad to hear she's better at least. Midoriya could give a rant about how they shouldn't hide things like this when they were talking about camp security and that they should be more honest with each other. But he was too tired to care. It was a lame and bad reason, he knew. But he didn't have the energy to try right now. Besides, if things went wrong he'd at least take care of himself. This was more an issue for the students who'd be at risk if something went wrong. Some of these idiots were more likely to hurt themselves than the intruders if anyone snuck in. The best thing was to evacuate the students while he took care of any big problems, but they needed to keep track of everyone. Wait. Wraith's brow furrowed as he did a head count, then grabbed the sword on his hip reflexively. We're missing the kid. Where is he? Kota. Mandalay blinked, then thought for a second. He's probably at his hideout. There's a cliff that he goes to a lot. It's over there, but you're gonna have to climb a little to get to it. Mandalay pointed off into the distance towards one of the many generic rock structures while Wraith stared incredulously at her. We just had an issue with security, and you're letting the most defenseless person here wander off on his own. Ah, forget it. Wraith shook his head as he took off into the woods without eating. They were literally talking about security problems and she left him alone. No wonder the kid had issues, so did his aunt, but she had mental issues. How stupid did you have to be to leave a child alone in the middle of this mess? As soon as he was out of eyesight he really took off, using his suit's full power and teleporting with his sword. It took only a single minute to get from the camp to the cliffs, with a child supposedly somewhere in this mess. It was steep, rough, and dangerous. He expected no less idiocy from professional heroes. As he scanned the rocky terrain, Wraith really started to understand Kota's problem. When they first met, Kota seemed to feel abandoned and left alone. The Welking had taken the logical approach and assumed it was because his parents had just died, but thinking about it this way, it seems no one bothered to pay attention to the child. He wondered how long it would have been before anyone came out here to look for Kota if he didn't bring it up. The other adults seemed delusional, to put it nicely, but they definitely weren't thinking about the kid. He was young and alone, stuck in the middle of nowhere with nothing to do. Wraith didn't think they'd devote 100% attention to him, but at least a little more concern for the kid would go a long way. Wraith finally found the kid on the ledge of one of the cliffs on a winding path overlooking the woods. It didn't look too comfy, sitting on the rocks. The wind was colder up here as it ruffled the trees, sending birds moving as it blew back. That cold wind drove against the lone boy and suddenly turned, snatching his hat off his head. Kota stood up and shouted as he grabbed at his hat. Hey. Silently creeping in from behind him, Wraith easily grabbed the hat from the air with barely a glance up, instead maintaining a steady gaze on the child as he stood tall. His gaze was intense and fierce, seeming to somehow amplify the roar of the wind against the otherwise silent setting. He had spoken to many people here, and made many theories, but there was one person they hadn't spoken to yet that the weakling wanted to. Wraith took a few slow steps forward and crouched slightly, meeting Kota at eye level as he handed back the boy's hat. Hello, Kota. Chapter and notes. Yo yiggity yo, guess who's doing some minor time skips? Next chapter's gonna be the last of the second day, then we're gonna blaze through the rest of the camp because it's such a happy time and place where nothing goes wrong. We're just gonna rush to the end for fun time so we can see everyone off. In this chapter Tilda just some quick stuff between Bakugo and Midoriya, as well as what most of the training is gonna look like. Unlike popular demand, Midoriya isn't just going to let students knock him around for an hour because he likes how his ribs are intact. Also throwing out the development of some moves earlier than expected because, well, it makes sense too. Midoriya's job is to teach them and help them grow, so if he does his job correctly they'll, in theory, learn and develop faster than normal. Fun fact, this chapter was supposed to come out 2 days ago because I had one full day to write. No meetings, no work, just me and the computer writing. And the internet was out for 8 hours that day. Rough times with these first world problems. Sorry for the delay, now I'm gonna shut up and watch another emotional scene. Adios. Chapter 135, a loud kind of quiet. Chapter summary. If that title makes sense, you're as delusional as the writer of this mess. Chapter notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Wraith crouched on the cliff face just by. Kota turned to look at him now, hesitating because of Midoriya's cryptic answer. He glared at Midoriya from under his hat, uncertain of what to do. He was too young to know what to do, so he was just making it up as he went along. Hell, they both were. Why yeah, I wanna know why. Wraith pondered how to say this politely. Should he be gentle, kind? Emotions weren't his thing. He was created for efficiency, for results, and when there were so many options to choose from he should have been ideal. But here he was, sitting on a cliff with some random brat he barely knew talking about heroism. Not a logical thing in sight. Who knows, Kota? Kota focused on him again, leaning in. Hey, what's that supposed to mean? Some do it for the money. Wraith leaned all the way back, laying on the ground and watching the stars. It was a good night to be outside. Heroism pays big bucks, so of course some people do. Not everyone's got good intentions and some people just want money. Some do it for the fame. Clouds drifted across the sky, dark patches in the night sky. The sudden switch from light to dark to light again as the clouds passed created a twinkling effect that was interesting to watch. Heroism's a quick way to become a celebrity. Do it for a couple of years, then switch to something else. Get your name out there. The public loves heroes, after all. Some just do it to fight. Kota was fidgeting, not sure what to do. He really didn't like listening to this. But he did ask, and he probably needed to. So Wraith went on. Some people become heroes just so they have an excuse to fight others, to prove they're the best. Everyone has their own reasons, after all. Wraith paused as he adjusted his position on the ground, picking out a loose pebbly that had been under him. He held it up, inspecting it in the starlight for a few seconds before speaking again. But some people become heroes just to be someone's hero. To help others, to save them from things they can't deal with on their own. Midoriya sat up, still tossing the rock from hand to hand. Isn't it weird? All these reasons to do one thing, and they're all wildly different. So many reasons for a single result. Kota wasn't looking at him, but he wasn't looking away either. Both now stared ahead at the same trees, watching the breeze as it dragged across the trees. They just sat there in silence for a time, watching the wind dance across the campgrounds. In the distance, there was light as the students prepared their dinners, movement as they congregated. Here in the cliffs, it was dark and still as the stone on the ground. Kota obviously wanted to leave by how he shifted nervously while Midoriya was fine if he stayed here all night. But he was supposed to be the adult. You know, Kota, I don't know everything. No shit. Kota forgot for a second that he was supposed to be angry at everything and was late with the snapback. He was definitely frustrated, he was definitely confused, but he wasn't good at being angry. But, if you have any questions, you've got to do something about them. Midoriya pushed himself away from the ledge and stood up, keeping the rock in his hand. I might not know everything, but with a little help, I can probably know anything, and so can you. So what? Am I supposed to ask you for help, you hero maker? Kota said it like an insult, and after seeing the state of UA it kind of was. But Midoriya just smiled it off as he tossed the rock. Quote. I dunno. Midoriya shrugged. Once again, he really didn't know. Didn't I just say I didn't know everything? You wanna ask me, go ahead. No harm in it. All I can promise is that I'll try to help you. Is that the kind of hero you wanna be? Kota remembered his little speech on modern hero motivations, it seemed. So you were listening, Tilda. Kota tensed up at that, but Midoriya just laughed it off. Quote. I don't know what kind of hero I want to be anymore. I say one thing but do something else, and that makes it really confusing. But, if I can help one kid who's going through a tough time, even if he calls me mean things like, hero maker. Midoriya smiled as he glanced down at Kota. Quote. I think I'm doing something right. Midoriya grabbed the rock with his right hand, stepping forward with his left before pivoting over his hips and launching the rock into the distance. It sailed off through the air, slowly giving into gravity as it flew between the trees and sunk below the leaves and branches. The two watched it even after it fell out of sight for a while. Midoriya wasn't really sure how long they spent watching it or how long they spent up there before he broke the silence again. Quote. You know, I haven't had a real meal all day. Wanna head back? Maybe those nutjobs trying to be heroes left us some food. Kota picked up his own rock and fiddled with it before lobbing it out into the trees as well, watching it fly through the air before hitting a tree and bouncing backward. You can cuss, you know, stupid hero maker. I'm not dumb. He hopped to his feet and ran back down the cliff face without another word. Midoriya shook his head, smiling on the outside as he slowly meandered after him. Telling me I can cuss? What a punk-ass bitch. They came back to the training grounds at the same time, but Kota was vehemently refusing to acknowledge him and ran away at the first second. Midoriya shook his head as he watched the kid run away, then turned to get some food for himself. It had been a long day full of bad meals, and at least wanted to end on some good food. Breakfast was skimpy, lunch was rushed, but now he had all the time in the world to make a good meal. Midoriya went to his room and grabbed his food bag, pulling out some of the seasonings and ingredients he brought for this. It wasn't anything fancy, but it should be pretty good. Midoriya came back outside with a smile to find the chaos of the students. It was a huge mess as they ate, argued, and shouted over each other. Eraserhead had his usual look of disdain, but what did he expect from teenagers? They were just enjoying themselves. Midoriya kept his distance as he started to make something for himself, a simple hot pot. He brought the equipment, he brought the flavors, and he brought some of the ingredients. He brought the major things needed for this himself, a pouch of spices and bones. All he really needed to complete the broth was some tomatoes the pussycats had. Are you really gonna make a hot pot? All for yourself? Someone was talking to him. One of the wild pussycats, the blue one. That was Pixie Bob. I'm a hungry guy, so I think I can do it. But if anyone else wants some of my food, they're welcome to it. Midoriya checked the broth was forming nicely, but it would take a while to really get going. That was fine, he was patient and he was hungry. He'd eat a lot of food. Nah, we already ate. Where'd you run off to, anyway? It seemed that really no one had been paying that much attention to Kota, or they had gotten used to him running off on his own. Either way. Just checking up on Kota. Didn't want anyone unaccounted after what happened to Ragdoll. Pixie Bob seemed to shift when Midoriya said that. The pussycats knew something about whatever happened to Ragdoll, and they weren't saying what for some reason. Do you know what happened? Yeah, course I do. She just overused her quirk. Overused her quirk? She'd been using her quirk all day for years, what was that supposed to mean? The wild pussycats were saying some wild stupid shit, but he had no proof. Something was going on here, and he couldn't trust these cats. Well, he figured that out when he realized he couldn't trust them to take care of a single kid. How could rescue heroes be so negligent with a single kid between the four of them? Well, it wasn't his business, as much as he'd like it to be. Midoriya got back to slicing the meat and checking on the pot while shaking his head. And is she feeling better now? Yup, Pixie Bob answered quickly again, but since he hadn't seen Ragdoll since it was probably another lie. Their central security person and caretaker, the one who could tell if they were injured, was down and for some reason no one admitted it. He'd have to keep a careful eye out now. Well, don't waste too much food. Pixie Bob waved goodbye as she walked off, leaving him to keep cooking. All she did was give him questions and confusions, and here he was about to enjoy a meal. No, wait. Yup, he didn't actually care enough and was still going to enjoy this. Most people liked hot pots, but it was done traditionally by the Mongols. Or was it started by the Mongols? His history was a little sketchy, and now that he thought too hard about it, did hot pots really have anything to do with the Mongols? Mongols started in Russia and China-ish, and he knew hot pots as a Japanese thing. Midoriya thought about it some more, then remembered he was supposed to be cooking and not thinking as he checked the broth again. He could just make a note on it and Google it when he got internet again. For now, chop the meat thinly, add the noodles, and pick the veggies he wanted to eat. There were 5 professional heroes here and 1 professional hero someone on site. He was going to relax or die trying. Once the hot pot got started, it was easy to keep it going. Just keep it on a burner, did the food you wanted it, then eat it. Midoriya did make a big pot or bring a lot of food since it was just him watching, but it was a great meal after the cold sandwiches for breakfast and his mostly rice lunch. Midoriya counted in his head as he dipped another cold cut of meat, doing a rough guess for how long he should hold it inside the hot broth to properly cook it. Hot pots were usually meals for a large group of people, but he didn't hang out with a lot of people. His hot pots had just been between himself and his mom, so he was used to this style of a small hot pot. Now that he was happily eating and much less grouchy, Midoriya looked around the camp at the students. The students were smiling as they spoke with one another, even if they were arguing. They were still dividing themselves into classes, but they at least seemed to get along. Even Bakugo had some friends somehow, much to Midoriya's undisguised amazement. Midoriya enjoyed the scene. Despite the noise and chaos, there was a strange sort of peace across the place. The students were enjoying themselves and weren't worried, creating a cheery atmosphere. The wild pussycats were still too cheery in his opinion, but they were balanced out by UA's stoic teachers. PFF. He couldn't even call them teachers in his head anymore. Midoriya shook his head, then held up a piece of meat to check how it was coming. These peaceful times were good, but they were coming to a close. Soon the students would have to put into practice what they learned if they wanted to maintain the peace, but were they ready? Would they need more time? Midoriya lowered the meat back into the broth as he looked across their faces, smiling wearily. How long did they have? How would they handle it? Wraith truly didn't know everything and was racked with questions, but no one could answer them. Only time would tell. Midoriya checked the time and pulled the meat out again, smiling. Finally, thought you'd never finish. Midoriya happily munched on different foods when Kaminari came over, smiling wide and running recklessly. Sensei. Sensei Tilda. I can see you coming a mile away Kaminari, relax. Midoriya was almost done eating and gestured for Kaminari to come and sit down, or at least cool off. He was only sitting about 10 feet away from the students on the ground, and waving an active war with the bugs. There weren't any bugs trying to eat his food at least, just bugs that thought Midoriya was the food. Can I do the practice thing again? Kaminari was, at least, very excited to train. That was a good mindset that'd pay off in the future when things got rough. I finished eating. Yeah, but I haven't. Midoriya gestured to his own plate, stopping to take another bite before continuing. How are you feeling after all that training? How are those legs? My legs. Kaminari thought for a second, then did a few squats like he didn't notice. Quote. Holy shit, my legs are super sore. He really didn't notice. Midoriya chuckled. You did a lot of work today Kaminari, and you need to take a break. You don't want to hurt yourself. Your body's adjusting and developing. It's like a video game, you gotta let it install the updates before you can use the update. Quote. Oh, Tilda I get it. Kaminari slumped to the ground across from Midoriya. So I need to rest now so I can try later. It's like a game with an exhaustion mechanic. It was more like normal exhaustion because that's exactly what it was, but hey, as long as Kaminari got it. Midoriya shook his head and took another bite of his food. The hustle's admirable, but you're gonna need to learn to relax. You can't be fighting all the time, after all. Oh, do you have some secret for that too? Kaminari leaned forward, once again excited and missing the point, but at least he was trying. Meditating, maintenance, enjoying yourself. Doing things to take your mind off of fighting. Midoriya dipped the last few pieces of food into the hot pot then quickly tried to swat a bug, narrowly missing it while smacking himself in the face. He rubbed his cheek and continued. If you're constantly thinking about fighting, you won't be able to rest and recover. You need to clear your head. Play some video games, talk with friends. Live. This really was comedic coming from them, but even Wraith did weapon maintenance. There was a time to clear your head for the fights ahead, and Wraith reveled in it. If this weakling went full speed all the time, he'd burn himself out like the beast almost did to them. Gotcha, get some rest now to do better later. Kaminari nodded and smiled, then looked down at Midoriya's plate. Hey, you gonna finish that? Quote. Kaminari, did you skimp out because you wanted to finish faster? Kaminari's quirk used a lot of energy, and in theory, he used it a lot today. If he didn't eat properly, he wouldn't get back that energy. Yes. Midoriya stared at him blankly, then laughed as he checked the hot pot. Go grab some more food then. Hurry up. The students compared their various works, most of them complaining about various similar things. Seriously, no lunch twice in a row. What's with this schedule? Mineta seemed furious, but his head had finally stopped bleeding at least. Right after that rushed breakfast too. And no breaks either. Jiro rubbed her earlobes, annoyed. I was baking out there, it felt like an oven. Forget the heat, I was so tired after that. Training with no breaks really is the worst. It seemed Class 1A and 1B could agree on one thing. This summer camp wasn't training, it was torture. Pissed, Bakugo. To one side though, was a slightly distanced group. All of Exam F exchanged nervous glances while nodding along with what everyone said. This we should mention. You losers didn't even get breaks. Bakugo spoke loudly so everyone could hear him as he glared across the room. What, are you extras too scared to use your mouths? And, as of that moment, Class 1A and 1B had a new uniting force. Being pissed off at Bakugo. Seriously, why are they being so loud? Midoriya and Kaminari were even further from the others as they washed their dishes, shooting them a confused look. Everyone suddenly got louder all at once, it was like they were synchronized. Man, maybe you should give them your speech about resting and stuff. Kaminari flicked water off his arms and grabbed the last of the plates as both of them headed inside. So, Sensei, what are you gonna do to relax? Today's the second night. That means we're supposed to have a bonfire tonight. That's why I told you to save a little room. Midoriya grabbed the door for Kaminari with one hand and entered after him, then used the same hand to quickly draw a bag of marshmallows from his coat. We're gonna have s'mores tonight. But I'm gonna go to bed early. I want to use the hot springs tomorrow morning. Whoa, are the baths still open? Kaminari looked surprised but that just got another laugh out of Midoriya. Of course, of all the things Midoriya just said, that's what Kaminari focused on. It's a natural hot spring, Kaminari. It's technically always open, it's just a question of if you have the time to go to it. Kaminari thought it over and nodded. I getcha. When's this fire then? I'm gonna put 3 marshmallows on a graham cracker. You think you can fit 3 on 1? Now, this is gonna be fun to watch. Midoriya laughed as the pair walked down to the kitchen, dropping off the dishes as they rambled casually. They joked back and forth casually, creating a strange sense of camaraderie. Amidst the noise, a strange peace, a loud kind of quiet as they grew closer. Chapter and notes. Yes, I am very proud of the title and no, I won't shut up about it. Okay, I'll shut up about it. For real though, the next chapter should be the last one of this day and we'll get to the next day with happy times within the same chapter. I promise even if I have to make the next chapter super long to get it in. I already said I was gonna do something though, and by god am I gonna do it. Probably. In canon I don't know if they got lunch, but since they didn't on their first day it wouldn't be too surprising if they didn't get in on any of their other days. In canon I'm also not sure if they got breakfast though because when we first see them it's 5:30 in the morning and they've clearly just woken up, meaning they didn't eat breakfast. Maybe they just had a really quick breakfast, maybe they went back and ate breakfast later, I don't know. Other stuff, hopefully this conversation was a little smoother than the last one. I tried hard to make it less awkward while not being great, and it was a fun balancing act cause I can't write emotions. Well, this took too long so I'm a bail now. Adios. Chapter 136. Chapter summary. Today I learned that writing a chapter around a song is stupid, so, what you'd learn today. Chapter notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. As dinner at the training camp wound down Midoriya and Tiger set up the fire stacks. Midoriya wasn't sure why it was just the two of them when the other heroes weren't doing anything, but he didn't care enough to ask for their help. He just wanted to get this done quickly so he could go to bed. Midoriya only planned to stay at the fires for 20 minutes before going to bed. He'd be waking up early the next day, so he'd make this quick. It was pretty dark, the students were almost done eating, and Midoriya was impatient so there was no reason to wait for starting the fires. Kaminari was there too, but he lacked the muscle to really help, incapable of moving the big logs or the benches. Kaminari instead was left with the lighter and got the honor of igniting the mess. He seemed pretty happy as the 3 fires slowly came to life, standing back and laughing. They're huge. The wood stacks were as tall as Kota, and the fires bigger than All Might as they blazed to life. It wasn't that unusual, and these fires would probably be burning for several hours. At least they were out in the stony training grounds, so they would be hard-pressed to start a forest fire, but someone would still be staying up late to make sure they went out. Yes, they're quite large, especially for a gathering of this size. 41 kids, 2 teachers, and 4 rescue heroes with a rogue vigilante somewhere in the mess. 3 bonfires were a lot for their group, especially because of their sheer size. They were massive as they burned, heating everything. The fires were so big and hot, it seemed to undo all the pleasure of the cool night. But Midoriya preferred the dark these days, so that could just be him. Kaminari seemed excited, and Midoriya wasn't in the mood for being a downer. Midoriya spared the students a glance as they started to come over from the dining tables and reached into his coat, rummaging around. Marshmallow. Everyone gathered around for whatever activity this was supposed to be and formed their own groups, leaving Midoriya alone. The classes grouped with themselves but repelled each other while Kota got stuck with the adults. Midoriya sat away from everything, happy to be alone. He wanted to get this over with as quickly as possible and really wasn't interested in this fire, instead wanting to get to sleep. Nothing was really keeping him from leaving, but Kaminari asked him to stay a bit and he was at least trying to give the students a good experience, so he'd stick around for a minute or two. Midoriya sang to himself to kill time as he checked out the groups, trying to figure out if anything interesting was going on but only stopped by his complete disinterest in everything. The students were talking about things they did inside the camp and how their days had gone. It seemed Kaminari had taken Midoriya's advice about relaxing to heart, but Midoriya had to admit he wished Kaminari would shake a leg and do whatever he wanted with Midoriya so Midoriya could go to bed. The teachers were just as if not more boring, not even talking about the camp at all. Midoriya understood not obsessing over the details of this camp, but when it was disorganized as this. And there he was, being negative again. The least he could do was pretend to be positive. Midoriya was sitting against a plank of wood and leaned back, admiring the stars. The view was great especially compared to the city. Most of the time, when he stared at the night sky, it was within the brightly lit city. They weren't that far from those bright cities but it still looked much better from here. Midoriya smiled as he sang to himself, just going through every vaguely camp-like song he knew to try and keep himself awake. He wasn't a good singer by any stretch of the imagination, but if he didn't do anything he was gonna take a nap right here and now. At least Kota was doing something he could get behind, cooking things with a metal stick on the fires. Kota was alone despite being with the adults because no one paid attention to him. Midoriya imagined Mandalay just told him to stay close or something because otherwise he'd have expected the kid to go back to his place on the cliffs. That seemed way more interesting than just sitting around, staring at a fire, and getting bug bites. Excuse me, sensei, could I ask you some questions? Midoriya's stupid singing was cut short as he glanced over, trying to figure out who was bored enough to talk to him. He knew from the voice that it wasn't Kaminari. A tall girl from 1A, and of course she was from 1A. Bakugo was right, it seemed 1B was created just to be in the background. Positivity Midoriya. Well, I don't know. I'm quite busy doing nothing. Midoriya stroked his chin like this was a hard choice as he sat up, tilting his head this way and that while his face scrunched, then peered at the girl and noticed that everyone was taller than him these days. Rough, but he should stop wasting time. What did you want to ask me? I just had some questions about what you were doing today, is that alright? What was with all the questions? You don't need to ask permission for everything. You're a student, your job's to learn. Midoriya could get up, it'd be very polite. But his left leg fell asleep and he didn't want to put weight on it, so instead he'd just keep on sitting up and answering her questions. Ask away. Momo had only come over to ask the elderly man about his schedule because, to be frank, Sato and Shiro did a terrible job describing what they had done that day, but she was pleasantly surprised by her conversation with him. He didn't seem as old as he looked as he casually joked with her, playing off his own age and pretending his leg was just asleep when he moved slowly. Besides the jokes, he seemed to have a pretty solid plan for what he wanted the students to do. So you divided the training into hour-long blocks with short breaks. Like a traditional school day. Yup. The elderly man nodded as he sat, confirming her theories. People made a great schedule for teaching people years ago, who am I to change it? I wonder if the rest of the class can adopt a similar method going forward. She was starting to get disgusted by the taste of chocolate and it was just day 1. The ability to take small breaks would be a welcome addition to her schedule. Thank you for your time, sir. It's nothing. A student's job is to learn, but it's a teacher's job to teach. The elderly man shrugged it off as he started to lean back before springing up and facing her. And another thing, there's no need to be so formal with me, I just don't know your name. This time the elderly man got his feet under him and slowly got up, stretching slightly before facing her dead on. He was a little shorter than her, just a few centimeters, but he seemed very fit for his age. You can call me Ken, and you would be Momo Yaoyorozu, but please call me Momo Siri-min, Ken-sensei. Ken-san snickered, shaking his head at her mistake. You don't have to force yourself. Do whatever's most comfortable for you. Ken-san sat down again, this time on the pile of wood instead of on the ground. He seemed pretty calm as he faced the fire before his attention snapped back to her, his face now stern. Do you remember what the job of a student is? She didn't even take a second to respond, immediately replying with his own words. To learn, Ken-san. Exactly. Ken-san leaned back against the wood, breathing out slowly as he faced the fire again. So, if you have any questions or any problems, they need to be sorted out. My job's to sort them out, so if anything comes up. I'm asking you what to do if anything comes up. Momo snapped to attention and spoke up. Speak to you, sir. When he asked it like a test, she found it much easier to talk back and forth with him. It was like he was testing how well she was paying attention. Now he nodded without looking at her. Good stuff. Enjoy the night, Momo-san. You're gonna have a long and hard day tomorrow. Yes sir, and thank you. Momo bowed briefly and Ken-san tried to return it from a sitting position, laughing at his own failed effort and giving her a small wave as she left. She returned to class 1A and sat among her peers, trying her best to remain dignified but having a hard time with Kaminari's big smile right next to her as he stared her down. Ain't he the best? Ken-sensei does seem to be quite the teacher. I will ask Aizawa-sensei if we can try his style tomorrow. She heard bits and pieces about Ken's fighting style from the students who failed their finals, but it was much easier to talk to him straight on. He even seemed to sometimes switch from his usually casual nature to speak to her in a way she could more easily understand, like when he asked her about a student's job. Ah, finally. Hope we can get some breaks. Think we'll get a lunch. As the other students talked, the one student who told her to go over there didn't even bother looking at her, ignoring everyone as he cooked a piece of meat with his bare hand before eating it. You know, I was surprised when you told me to talk to him. He glanced over at her and scoffed, creating another string of explosions on his hand. I told you to use your mouth, extra. You wanted to know something, just spit it out. Bakugo refocused on the fire, grabbing the next piece of meat to cook for his friends. Seriously, fucking extras can't do shit. Midoriya wasn't really sure why Momo came to talk to him, but it was a pleasant conversation. She probably heard about their training and wanted to try it, since it was an actual regimen unlike what they were doing. Eventually though the guy who asked him to stick around, Kaminari, came over. There you are. Thought you got lost along the way, Midoriya joked as he adjusted himself on the woodpile. This wasn't the comfiest chair in the world, and Midoriya was about to ditch it for his bed. Hey, you want some of the meat we cooked? It's just like the hot pot. Kaminari sat next to him with his plate, smiling widely as he offered some food. Hey, sure. Midoriya took a piece of meat, smiling. So what did you want me here for? Hanging out. Dude. Kaminari laughed, then handed him the plate. And to hold this. My hands are tired after all that training. The training I did with you. Yeah. Kaminari laughed harder, leaning back on the ground beside Midoriya. His smile looked a lot more real now than the ones he was giving off previously. Kaminari seemed to notice Midoriya staring at him and then sat up and leaned into him. Hey, what's with that smile? Tilda. Nothing, hero. Wraith shook his head as he looked back into the fire, smiling. And another thing. What's with that bandana? Everyone wants to know, so come on. Give me some details. Come on, please. Pretty please. Sensei. Well, even if Kaminari roped him into staying up later than he wanted to, it at least made sleeping in the bed way more bearable. He was so tired by the time he finished cleaning off and meditating that he went straight to sleep comfortably. Right until his alarm clock went off, tipping it off the head of the bed and making it fall on his face as a foolproof way to make sure he woke up on time. After getting conked on the noggin by his own plan came a quick wash up before grabbing his things and heading off. Once he found out he could do this, Midoriya really looked forward to it. Wasn't even 4:40 by the time he entered the changing rooms for the bathhouse. Most of the students would probably be getting up at 5 o'clock, so Midoriya had all the time in the world as he flipped on the lights for the hot springs one by one. Even had electronic lanterns, just for that old style. Made him smile as he changed, leaving his items inside a locker and walking into the washing area. He couldn't help but admire the sky as he walked outside, seeing the dark sky littered with stars. It was peaceful, and who knew when they'd get a quiet time like this again. They'd savor it. The water washed over his body, cleansing all the dirt and filth he got caught up in on his way here. He thoroughly scrubbed his body, feeling the water go cold in the morning chill. One last bucket to cleanse the water off of him and he was ready to go. The water was steaming by the time he finally got to the hot springs itself with his drink in hand. He carried his bottle in hand as he strode into the water, feeling the sudden contrast between the cold air and the hot water. He was used to the slight pain as his body had to adjust, already comfortable with being uncomfortable. Midoriya pushed past the slight burning sensation as his body got used to this new temperature, trudging through the water calmly. He set his bottle on a tray and let it drift across the water, smiling as it spun in a circle before finally sitting down and really getting into the water. He sunk down in the water, closing his eyes and really taking it in. He could praise bathhouses and shit, saying some poetic stuff about the contrast between the freezing air on his face and burning water on his body, but he wasn't that poetic and that was really exaggerated. Maybe because he thought stuff like that was just an over-exaggeration was why he wasn't a poetic guy. Instead of all that stuff like praising the amazing power of an overly fancy bath, Midoriya reveled in the silence. There were no voices telling him what to do. There were no battles to fight. There was just quiet. Midoriya leaned back, keeping his eyes closed as he savored the heat. His muscles began to relax as he lay there, taking slow but deep breaths. Just reveling at the moment. He opened his eyes and looked to the sky. The once dark sky was already starting to brighten. He couldn't stay here forever. It felt like he just got in, and already he was thinking about getting out. Midoriya took another deep breath and rested his head against the stonework, closing his eyes again. Even a moment's peace was too much. Or maybe, that was the problem. A moment's peace was, in the end, just a moment. He didn't want a moment's peace, he didn't want just a second between the chaos. He wanted there to be no more chaos. But was that realistic? Probably not. Midoriya took a drink from his bottle before putting it back down on the tray and watching it drift away. Midoriya watched that tray for a long time as it spun out of control. It wasn't a fast spin, it didn't take a lot to get out of it, but it was still stuck spinning on its own. The stars were fading now. The sun was coming. He wanted to hold on to this peace for a moment longer, but it wouldn't stay. They could make it stay. They could make the peace last. All he had to do was decide. Midoriya closed his eyes again, shutting it all out as he just listened to himself breathing. He didn't know where or when this would end, but he'd have to see this through. He couldn't sit back anymore, it wasn't in his nature anymore. Izuku had changed, but he wasn't sure it was for the best anymore. They had come so far, but the same could be said for jumping off a building. Their sun was rising. Their time had come. Midoriya rose from the water, taking one last breath out as he walked up and out to face the day. Ole, ole, ole o Lord Tilda. Chapter and notes. Yo yagati yo, this really is an old-fashioned chapter. Big spaces that make it look like garbage, long periods of ditching Midoriya's name as he loses himself, and it's posted way too late. We're bringing it back to basics. First off, this chapter was sort of supposed to be designed around the song that comes up in the end, Soldier Poet King, but I couldn't do it how I wanted to. I wanted to put it in at the campfire scene, but Midoriya isn't much of a singer and it doesn't make sense to have a Japanese teenager sing a, at the time, 200-year-old song. I know Midoriya didn't have to sing it, but I wanted it to and I hope it's good for an ending song. Hopefully, it synced up pretty well since you're supposed to read slowly when there are spaces like that. Another fast fact, having characters do things out of character. Kinda cringy. Don't do it. Main points though, because Soldier Poet King might still be playing if you're a fast reader, and that song's pretty good. Hope the solo bath scene wasn't too bad. Originally someone was supposed to interrupt it and his name is Kaminari, but I like this version better. I hope the moments with the students weren't too forced as more people are starting to interact with Midoriya, and we might see some of those interactions next chapter. Also, we finally made it to the third day, where we're really gonna speed it up. Sorry if you were looking forward to training segments, but I'm trying to go fast now, hopefully it doesn't feel too rushed. In the meantime, see y'all later, skaters. Chapter 137. Chapter Summary. 6:30 is Zero, 7:40 was Kaminari, 8:50 is Kirishima, 10 o'clock is Sato, 11:10 is Kaminari, 12:20 is lunch, 1 o'clock is Mina, 2:10 is Kirishima, 3:20 is Bakugo, 4:30 is Kaminari, 5:40 is Bakugo. This isn't for the readers, but I don't really have anything to put here, so tilde. Oh yeah, we're getting into the quick training. Fast facts. We be zooming now. Chapter notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Midoriya walked confidently out into the morning sunlight with a bottle in hand, taking in the scenery as he stood tall outside the main building before sparing the students a glance. Eraserhead was talking with the students and seemed mildly annoyed, then shot Midoriya a stern glance. That bounced right off as Midoriya went back to taking in the sights. Eraserhead faced his students, sighed dramatically, and moved on as they cheered. The sound brought a smile to Midoriya's face, just a minor change to the system brought out by students. If they could do that, what could he do? Midoriya finished his drink and went back inside for a real breakfast and to check up on who was awake. Most students were taking the chance to sleep in since he moved their starting time to 6:30 instead of 5:30, but a few were out and about. Zero was the first one who caught his eye as he quickly tried things to eat other than oatmeal, supported by Bakugo who had gone to bed and gotten up early and was finishing eating. Midoriya got through his breakfast quickly as the students filtered in and the room was filled with voices. The students seemed to get along pretty well, even Monoma. They butted heads, but they bounced back pretty fast. Another smile right there, and he'd only been awake for 2 hours. That didn't seem like a lot, but he used to only get real smiles once a month. 2 in one morning was pretty impressive. He checked the time and kept that positive energy going as he stood. Alright, 10 minutes before we start. Everybody, start getting warmed up. Zero, get changed. We've got a lot of progress to make today, alright? Yeah, I see the target. Isn't that just your bag? Zero and Midoriya stood atop one of the cliffs and stared at the trees, specifically at a bag that Midoriya had thrown in there earlier. What? No, that's not my bag. It's the pussycats. I wouldn't throw my own bag in a training exercise. What do you think I am, crazy? Midoriya finished grabbing his own stuff, such as kindness and one of the metal needles he'd accidentally found in this jacket. Seriously, he must have made at least 1,000 of these needles with how they cropped up everywhere. But whose bag is whose isn't the point. All I need you to do is hit the bag with a piece of tape, alright? Take as many tries as you need. Midoriya gave Zero a pat on the back and then moved away from the edge of the cliff. He gave Zero a confident thumbs up as he ran away from the cliff face while Zero glanced back and forth a little worried. Why are you running? Is that bag filled with explosives? I don't know, you better grab the bag and find out. The cliff face they stood on was one of many on the side of a mountain. Was a generous term, but it was a steep incline made of stone. Midoriya went up the cliff that was behind them and drew out Yamato, carving a very rudimentary target in the stone, then glancing back and watching Zero shoot out and try to grab the bag. Range wasn't an issue, speed wasn't even a factor, but the size of the target was a problem. The bag wasn't caught on any branches, it was just sitting atop the branches to be easily grabbed, but Zero was having a hard time hitting it because of other things in the area. He'd hit other branches and get stuck, then have to pull back and start over again. Took a minute just to finally get a grip on the bag. Finally, now what? Zero looked over at him as Midoriya walked back over, finished with his carving. See that target over there? Midoriya pointed the carving out to Zero. It was the classic shooting target. A vague humanoid shape with some dots for the brain and heart. However, it was only a carving in the stone, so it was kind of hard to make it out. The blob thing's the new target. That's way easier to tape. Hold on just a second, don't let go of the bag just yet. Midoriya stopped Zero from letting go and continued to focus on the humanoid target. I want you to hit the target with the bag. Like a sling. Zero tried to think this through and Midoriya nodded. I don't want you to move from this position, but I want the bag to hit that target. Seem fair? Seems pretty easy. Zero was wisely on guard after yesterday's training. Alright, watch this. Last one Zero, then we call time. Midoriya held up a rock about the size of his head, shaking it slightly so Zero could get a good visual on it. Gotcha sir, and ready. Zero stood, tired but confident as he smiled with his tape already partially out. He was starting to get the hang of this. Midoriya launched the rock into the air and Zero shot the tape out, catching the rock midair before pulling it in and lobbing it at the humanoid target on the cliff face. The rock struck the target in its large body, scoring a successful hit and marking him down for his 116th hit with this style. Alright, you see that? Damn straight. Caught it before it even started falling. Midoriya walked over and gave Zero a congratulating pat on the back as they both admired the cliff face. Good power too, I think you might have even put a few new dents in here. Time's up then. Zero looked a little disappointed but Midoriya could only confirm his worries. Yes, but you've done well. Tomorrow we'll do some more practice with this and, if you're feeling cocky, we'll try for a moving target. Don't you mean confident sir? Zero smiled, showing off that cockiness Midoriya was talking about as they moved away. If you pull it off, it's confidence. If you don't, it's cockiness. Oh, did you want to keep practicing? Midoriya realized that, at the current location, Zero could practice either his tape dispenser or hitting a target. You'll need to take breaks and I don't want you to move from your starting position, but you can keep doing this training. You just need to pick up the rocks after you throw them again, don't just keep them on the same string of tape. Sure, I'll do that. Thanks, sir. Zero laughed as the two returned to the group with everyone stopping to look at them. Midoriya stood atop the cliff and put his hands over his mouth, shouting so everyone could hear him. Alright everyone, break time. Take 10. Kaminari, you're up. Get ready. Kaminari and Midoriya went back into the drawing cut, practicing getting it off reliably before trying to do anything like hit something or go fast with the slash. They like you, dude. No, I assure you, your teachers hate me. Nice footwork, try to keep doing that nice step in. Midoriya pointed to Kaminari's feet then continued, keeping pace with his student to demonstrate proper form. Not them, the class whoa. Too hard on the step in now Kaminari. You're not doing the front splits, don't separate your legs so much. Gotcha sir. They like me. Impossible. I've talked to 2 of them. He talked to Ojiro when he changed his regiment and Momo last night, but outside of that, he didn't talk to any of them ever, including the other times he came to UA like the pop quiz or the USJ attack. They probably do like the regiment at least. It's not suicide like Eraserhead as well. I guess that regiment is UA's, not Eraserhead's. Still man. Whoa, I think I felt that in my shoulder. Good, you should be using your right shoulder in this attack. Pull those shoulder blades together while you're drawing the sword for some extra power. Midoriya focused Kaminari away from random things like popularity and on the real work here, teaching him how to do another attack. Let's do another 20, and we'll switch it up, alright. Sir, yes sir, just watch me. Ah, Kaminari finally managed to do that full front split that Midoriya had mentioned earlier and had earned one whole head shake from his teacher. Quote. Well, I'm watching alright. Come on, let's get you up. Kirishima stepped in and began to shoot his fist out over and over, keeping his guard tight while Midoriya stood to one side, whacking him with a stick to remind him to keep his guard tight. Good work, good work. Remember, in a punch-out like the ones you like, the first person to step back loses. Keep it going. 10 more. Kirishima was losing steam, but when you started to slip was the same time you had to buckle down in a brawl. He forced Kirishima to keep those punches fast, maintaining a solid string of them before, stop. Good work, take a minute off. Deep breaths. Kirishima stepped back and nearly doubled over, leaning on Midoriya for stability. Holy shit, you got more water. Nope, Gatorade, you earned it. Midoriya helped Kirishima sit down after his last constant string of jabs, then grabbed a drink from the bag and tossed it to Kirishima. Now, how you feeling about your jab? Fast. Takes. A lot. Kirishima was sweating a lot, so Midoriya also gave him a spare water to start working on after the Gatorade was done. But, it's going out as fast as I want now. How are you feeling about your guard? Think you've got it down? Kirishima was doing a much better job of keeping his guard up even if he was just punching thin air, probably because of the annoying dumbass to his right who kept prodding him with a stick. Gotta watch out for the droop. Kirishima's big problem was, if left alone, his hands started to drift down. His guard was supposed to keep his hands about cheek level, but gravity pulled them down, and if Kirishima wasn't thinking about them he'd let gravity win. That's why the constant pestering was good, it was a constant reminder to get his hands up. And my footwork isn't sloppy anymore. Ever since Kirishima learned why footwork was important in punching, his had improved a lot. It still was his most common practice, but unlike the constant tapping, there wasn't really a trick to fix it. Fixing bad footwork just took attention and time, or at least, Midoriya didn't know any tricks to speed this up. But, now, since Kirishima was feeling confident. You've been paying attention, I see. All of what Kirishima said was right, which was great. Someone who was self-aware could more easily adapt and notice problems with themselves. You ready for something new? Something new. Kirishima tilted his head, surprised like it was the Spanish Inquisition. We've been working with your left arm a lot so far, but we've got 40 minutes and you've got 2 arms. Midoriya got in position, assuming the peekaboo stance and then suddenly stepping forward like he was throwing a jab. The lead foot came forward but the back leg turned to push off the ground, raising his back heel up. His hips twisted a little and his shoulders twisted a lot as his right hand rocketed forward, pulling the arm behind it as it twisted, fully extending into a sharp punch. Think you can handle this straight? Kirishima seemed stunned for a second, staring at the action pose. So manly. It was just a punch, and the second most basic punch in boxing too. And it didn't really answer the question. Oh, yeah, I'm pumped, let's do this. Everyone, break, take 10. Sato, get ready. Wraith helped a very tired brickhead sit down, giving him a pat on the back. How are you feeling? Tired. We went way faster this time than when I learned the jab. Of course, we had to cover the fundamentals of guards and footwork before, now we can skip straight to the punch itself. Wraith was glad Kirishima noticed the difference in the time it took to actually get into learning the punch itself. Before they did the whole leaf training, but now they just learned the punch and started practicing. We also did a lot more punches, so your arms are going to be sore. I want you for your next training to start using your legs. My legs. Am I gonna learn kicks? Kirishima looked a little worried at the thought. Not unless you want to, no, but running is a great way to improve endurance. You're also going to need strong legs for good punching and dashing. This will help you close distance on opponents. Remember the Kaminari fight? Yeah, can't fight M if I can't catch M. Kirishima poured the water on his head and stretched. So you want me to run? It doesn't need to be fast, but yes. 10 minutes for your first time would be fine and try to avoid completely stopping. Slowing down's fine, but don't stop, alright? Right. Kirishima exchanged nods with him and focused on drinking as Midoriya got up, stretching and moving over into the woods to start up the next training. He'd need some big pieces of wood for what came next. Sato grabbed the piece of wood like it was a villain and pushed against it, practicing his tackle while Midoriya watched. Good speed, but a bad angle. Don't grab his ankles. Where do you want to grab Sato? Body, sir. Sato stepped back and re-grabbed the giant piece of wood from higher up, lifting it. Now that he grabbed it closer to center mass, it was easier to balance and lift, and he could move around more easily. Perfect. Go for the hips or under the shoulders. Hard to squirm at the hips and it's cramping the arms at the shoulders. Now get running to me. Midoriya stood alone at the end of the path and gestured for Sato to come at him. Sato tightened his grip on the wooden pillar and charged, rushing past Midoriya. Now, slam in the ground. Sato fell into the dummy as his charge halted, then planted his feet and continued his charge straight into the ground. Sato didn't even need to be told as he went for the pin, holding it for 10 seconds before standing up. Pulling a great ending from a rough start, not bad Sato. Not bad at all. Midoriya clapped as he approached the rough hunk of wood he carved up with Yamato. It was the former trunk of a tree that had gotten blown up by Bakugo yesterday. It was slightly charred and rough, meaning it was easy to grip and sturdy. Perfect for wrestling practice, if you could call this wrestling. So, what did you think about your run? It was easier with the second grip, I was sure I was gonna tip backward at first. Sato wasn't aware of the physics behind it, but he was at least pretty aware of how it felt. Good instincts. Let's run it again. Go for that grip right out of the gate. Aim for the hips. Wraith helped reset the dummy by lifting it up then replanting the spike in the ground, forcing Sato to lift it up off the ground before he started running with it. A good tackle like this required lifting the target cleanly off the ground so they couldn't resist, then building momentum and slamming them into the ground. Wraith wasn't going to explain all of that at once though and was letting Sato figure it out naturally, like how he realized he could fall into a slam to put his weight into it then pushing himself forward and down to maximize power. All good fighting tactics, now it was his job to make sure the student learned them. Wraith could enjoy it when the weakling made clear plans like this and followed through with them. Now, all it had to do was its orders. Wraith stepped back and locked eyes with Sato. Again. Kaminari started with the drawing cut, stepping out while attacking and readying his sword, then combining it straight into the overhead cut from yesterday. His attacks were starting to merge together and become faster, becoming less of two quick hits and merging into one combination. Kaminari then sheathed his sword and went straight into another one. He didn't get better with every try, but he did try every time he grabbed that sword, and that was all they could ask for. They could see his determination as those attacks came closer and closer to the level even the weakling had trained 2 months ago. Watch your legs, and there we go. Kaminari adjusted quickly as he worked to perfect this simple attack, immersed in the motion. Good. And time. Take a break. Kaminari breathed a sigh of relief, sheathed his sword, then wiped the sweat off his hands. I'm starting to think my hero outfit needs a serious rework. Perhaps. Wraith's attire and Kaminari's attire were very different and it wasn't hard to see. Kaminari had a flashy coat, slick pants, and looked like he was trying to be fashionable. Wraith, on the other hand, looked like shit. Everything was functional, sure, but the big coat with rolled-up sleeves didn't pair up well with his bags, pants or bodysuit, and his gauntlets and boots contrasted with everything else. He at least didn't stick out with all the dim and dull colors as well as the mostly uniform shape. Still, Wraith wasn't in a position to give fashion advice. He was just glad to be aware of how bad he looked. On the other hand, however, Wraith understood functionality like no one else. You are aware heroes have separate summer and winter outfits, correct? Kaminari's head popped up as he didn't even try to hide his surprise. Are you serious? Yes. You don't have to wear a coat with your current outfit, especially in this heat. Remember, the simpler the outfit the better. Kaminari was wearing a black coat, the best the Broken had given him after their fight, a white shirt, black slacks, black shoes, and strange shades. Your outfit should be designed for fighting first and fashion second. Oh, that explains why you look like garbage most of the time. Kaminari was really blunt about it and earned a laugh for his honesty. Probably. Ditch the coat and the vest and have some water, we've got work to do. They both got a laugh out of his bad fashion sense as Kaminari picked up his water bottle, draining it before they got back into the flow. Chapter and notes. Yo yigati yo, we be zoomin' now. What's popping my dudes, quick chapter for quick times in quick places. Just a moment to see what everyone's doing with the next chapter starting around lunch. About the stuff that happened in here. Well, shit, I've got nothing to talk about because this chapter was just training. We're still at least doing training with the quirks sort of, but Midoriya never said he was going to focus on quirk training, so most of his is going to be about implementing skills with the quirks. Just a few moments with Midoriya and other people so we can build those relationships, but they're really small cause. IDK, I wanted this to be quick and short. Hope it wasn't too cringe. Chapter 138. Chapter summary. Interesting. Chapter notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Break for lunch. We go back to work at 10 backwood clock sharp, so come get some food. Midoriya took charge of the lunch shift as soon as he came out of the forest, and by coincidence, that meant he got to pick his food first. The students seemed to come as a giant swarm, all running towards him at once. The scene reminded Midoriya of something straight out of a zombie flick with the waves of people all charging and pushing each other to get to some food. Midoriya had just come out of the forest, finishing up training Kaminari for the second time today, and was now helping the zombie students get the food they wanted to eat alongside the wild pussycats. They might have been a band of idiots, but they could at least give food to children so they weren't completely useless. Only mostly useless. The children did well enough preparing food for themselves, even if they were disorganized. They didn't make a complete mess of everything as they cooked, all under the watch of Wraith. He had mentioned they were loud and boisterous many times before so he wouldn't bother, the same for the strange segregation between the classes. 1A and 1B perfectly divided themselves with nary a glance for the other, and in the back the teachers know, the supervisors felt generous and adults implied maturity. Ah. The fraudulent fuckheads pretending to be heroes watched from the back, seeming to be proud despite having done somewhere between jack and shit. Wraith scoffed and took another bite of the sandwich he whipped up, then checked the schedule. Next up was the pink girl, Mina, who'd thrown them for a loop during their match. The memory briefly brought a smile to his face before logic took over. Yes, Mina had beat them, but only after pulling a suicidal tactic that would have gotten her killed in a real fight. Hell, if he hadn't been in control of the situation, she could have easily died in a fake fight too. They were applauding these kids for doing the bare minimum, but they didn't want the bare minimum. They wanted heroes. They wanted competency. Wraith scowled as he spoke under his breath into his sandwich. Remember what you want to do, weakling. Stop backing down. Midoriya took slow small bites, remembering the plan. Everything they had seen and heard cemented the plan and he'd get to work with All for One. He had no problems about that. All for One was the most competent man Midoriya had ever met. But, since All for One was only competing with principals and heroes from Midoriya's past, he was basically a shoo-in to win. Some of the students here would good, but just as a few bad apples didn't ruin an orchard, neither did a few good apples save one. As an organization, UA was a disaster. Wasted budget, incompetent management, and poor communication. That wasn't even mentioned the mess of the current hero industry, focused on stupid things like money and fame when they should be saving people. It was hard to admit it, but the heroism they once idealized was long since dead. Perhaps it had never been real, but it definitely never had anything to do with UA. Midoriya finished eating and scanned the crowd. These students, even the ones he was teaching, would be his enemies someday. No, they were already his enemies. He was a vigilante after all. They wanted to become professional heroes, the very thing he hated so much. And here he was, teaching them to be better at fighting. Not better at heroism, fighting. None of this made any sense. Which was what Wraith had been saying the whole time. This whole trip was a mistake for them and a waste of time. There was no logic in helping a future enemy. Which begged the big question, what were they doing here? Midoriya was still looking at the students as they argued over their food and shouted at each other, firing off quirks and words with barely a second thought. Why were they here, really? They were here to teach a bunch of kids how to fight, but what was the point for them? To get straight to the crux of the matter, what did they get out of this camp? Why were they doing this? Because they said they would, like some sense of duty. Irrelevant, especially when dealing with these fraudulent heroes. Because they got something out of it. All they got was Eraserhead's scarf, and with how terrible Eraserhead actually was at fighting, they could have just knocked him out from a range with a gun and stole his. They were supposed to get more things later, but UA didn't have anything else that the aspiring vigilante needed. No, there was no logical explanation for them still being here. All reasons said they should have left after the first day when they realized that UA was just as horrible of an option as the rest of them. And yet, here they were, dining with the enemy. Why? Midoriya really couldn't think of an answer. He could leave, he was strong enough by leaps and bounds that no one could stop him even if they wanted him to stay because of confidentiality or something. He had tons of reasons to, even beyond what Wraith had listed so far, like the wild pussycats, suspicious behavior. But for some reason, here he was getting another sandwich. Why was he sticking around? What was the point in staying here anymore when he fully realized UA was total shit? The answer was probably something vague that they'd never fully understand, but Wraith didn't like vague things. He liked concrete answers, so he could probably think of one now if he asked the right questions. Why did the weakling want to stay here? That was too complicated. What do you really want? Mina huffed, trying to catch her breath as she chased after the old man. Hey, wait up. You're trying to catch me, it'd defeat the purpose if I slowed down. The old man barely glanced back as he moved around the terrain quickly like some sort of ninja, hopping over rocks and off of trees with dramatic cool-looking flips. If you're only focused on catching up to me though, you'll never surpass me. Mina slowed down for a second so she could breathe a little easier before diving back in and sliding after him, creating acid from her feet and then kicking off the ground to quickly chase after him. They had been doing some endurance training to try and get her more used to moving in weird situations like this with the rough ground from all the trees and rocks, and it was gonna be time to end soon. Time, it's been 10 minutes. Take a break, Mina. The old dude slowed to a stop and faced her, seeming to check her out for a second. Not bad. Huh, what you looking at? If this was Mineta, this was usually the part where he got punted to the moon, but the old guy continued with barely a second thought. I would have thought we were further apart. You did a good job on closing the distance in the end. The oldie reached into that weird duster he wore and lobbed a water bottle at her, then sat down on a rock and massaged his leg. A few problems with endurance, but only training and time can solve that. Instead, we'll have to work on things like precision and combining the good mobility with your quirk use. Do you understand? The old man took out a drink for himself and made eye contact to make sure she got his point this time. Mina returned his expectant stare with a nod and started drinking the water in the few moments of rest she got during this hour. It was oddly quiet while she drank the water and rested up with just the two of them in the middle of the forest. Eventually, the gramps-looking dude broke that awkward quiet. Quote. Mina, what do you want? What? What do you want to do? The old man seemed to peer at her even with his eyes hidden underneath his bandana. He seemed different now, like he was way more tired than before. It was like he had some dark vibe around him now. Like, with my life. I haven't thought that far ahead. Mina laughed it off, scratching the back of her head. Well, I want to be a hero obviously. Why? His tone wasn't hostile, just confused. Curious. He sounded like her dad or something, and while it was a little awkward talking with someone like this, he seemed pretty genuine. What, are you trying to get to know me? It seemed a pretty funny idea, but she'd play along with it. To beat the bad guys, duh. Plus, to be honest, heroes are super cool and famous. But you already knew that, my bad. Anything else? Mina leaned against a tree as she tried to think of another reason to be a hero. Well, the money's good I think, I dunno about that though. Might only be good if you're in the top. Any other questions, Gigi? Mina stopped thinking and focused on the tired guy who was now leaning forward, getting off the rock and standing up. No, I think that's plenty. Let's get ready for your training. What I want? Kirishima stopped punching and took a second to think about it. You can take your time, I don't want a rushed answer. Teach backquote stepped back, giving Kirishima some breathing room after their practice fight. If Kirishima wanted to keep practicing his punches by fighting Sensei, he'd have to step up to start attacking again, which would let Sensei know that Kirishima wanted to continue without words. This guy thought ahead. Yeah, definitely has to be becoming a hero. Kirishima didn't take too long to think about this, it was the obvious answer after all. Doesn't everyone here want to? Oh yeah, Teach backquote said he wasn't a hero and never had been. I mean, you do no harm. Even I once wanted to be a hero. Sensei chuckled slightly, dropping his guard as, Kaminari, I want to know what kind of hero you want to be and why you want to be a hero. Kaminari stared at him blankly, his head slowly tilting. If you listened closely you could hear the gears turning in his head as he tried to figure out what the hell his teacher was talking about before responding, oh, that's easy. A fighting hero. I'm not really suited for support or rescue, so it's gotta be fighting hero. I wanna be like, a hit-and-run hero. Not like Aizawa-san is, but, definitely not the same kind of hero as All Might or Endeavor, I'm too weak for that. Quote. Like Kamui Woods. Yeah, I really want fight like he does, which is so weird. I didn't think I'd ever be this fast when I started attending UA. Kaminari nodded with a satisfied smile, but he hadn't finished answering the question. And why do you want to be a hero, Kaminari? Wraith gave him a push in the right direction and let Kaminari think some more, sitting down on the ground while he waited for either Kaminari to answer or finish the drink and get back to training. Oh, 'cause my whole family's a hero organization. Kaminari didn't have to think too hard about that one. We're not big, but when I grow up I'm probably gonna be a sidekick there for a while before taking over. Your whole family? Do you have siblings like Iida? Nah, it's just me, my mom, my dad, and a few sidekicks. Like I said, we're not big. Kaminari didn't think much about it, shrugging. I'm probably gonna take it over someday, but that's not gonna be for a long time. Who knows, maybe I'll even try out some other agencies first. I might work at UA like you. Like me, now that was pretty funny. Ironic even, but Wraith would give it to him straight. Kaminari, you dowel, I don't think you do, so I'll tell it to you straight. This is my last time working with UA. Wraith locked eyes with Kaminari, making sure he got the point across. This will probably be the last time you see me. By the time you become a real hero, I'll be long gone. Kaminari took a few seconds to process it, his expression slowly freezing as it went through his head. Are you serious? You're doing good, but I hope you can be great. You can do the things I never could. The weakling wanted to be a hero, wanted to change the world by being a righteous example, but the world didn't work like that. As a quirkless person, this modern society of quirks and heroes would never take them seriously. If they tried to side with the law they would always face these limitations, and most of their work would be set in trying to take down these walls. Someone might finish their work, but if they went through the law, Wraith had no doubts that they'd never see their dreams realized. So they could not go through the law. Not through the corrupt hero association or the horribly mishandled UA high school. For the sake of their principles they'd give up on their morals and force the world to change, not with words but with actions. A new age of this world forged from blood to force society to adapt, to force society to rise from its mediocrity. No longer would heroes be allowed to just be good, they would have to become great once again to face their new monster. A lot of people would die, but a lot more people would be saved. It would be difficult, it would be painful, but they were used to the pain. They could be the bad guy. They were tough enough to take it. But they didn't just want to kill. They wanted to create real heroes who'd defeat them. Not the fakes of today, but real heroes who wanted to save people from the monsters. Real heroes who weren't in it for the money or fame but because the world needed saving. Real heroes who maybe, just maybe, could have saved them. So, before I leave, I'm going to try and make you the best hero I can. Do you understand? Kaminari wasn't a perfect hero, only getting into heroism because it was the family business, but no one today had a good answer for him. Mina's ideas were blatantly terrible, Kirishima was trying to count his chickens before they hatched, and Bakugo wanted to be a villain with a license. Wraith would make do with what he had and try to create the greatness he wanted to be defeated by. No, I don't understand. Kaminari seemed a little more upset than anticipated, looking somewhere between confused and sad. Why is this your last thing with UA? Differing ideals. They want something, I want something else, so we both try to get those things without each other. If you wanted to go one way and someone else wanted to go the other, the easiest thing to do was split up. This wasn't even about morals, this was just treating UA as a business opportunity. It didn't have what they wanted or needed, so they'd be leaving. Plain and simple. Oh, alright, but I won't see you again, like, ever. Are you going to another country or something? Kaminari laughed, but it was that fake laugh again. Perhaps, All for One said he was headed for America and he might want Wraith to tag along. Their mother would be an obstacle in that, but they could try to convince her by moving to America as a family. His father was supposedly in America somewhere, so they could find him. It was more likely though that Wraith would stay in Japan and help All for One's business efforts, probably as either a thief or assassin. While not trained in either they definitely had the skills and equipment necessary, and Wraith could use that to create the image of the supervillain they'd have to become to create the social change they had been seeking. But that didn't matter so much right now. Right now, they were supposed to be training, but the weakling definitely would want to tell Kaminari this sort of thing before they left. We will probably see each other eventually. You are aiming to be a hero, after all. It'll always be easy to find you, so maybe I'll come find you once you've left UA to see the kind of hero you've become. Really? You promise? Kaminari looked hopeful as his teacher nodded, but that wasn't necessarily a good thing. They would eliminate the fake heroes, no matter who they were. Wraith nodded as he stood up and took guard, ready to continue the fight. That's a promise. What's taking them so long? We have a teleporter for fuck's sake. He adjusted his cloak as he spoke from within the abandoned military base, ready to teleport in and start causing trouble. He was anxious for a fight. Handy Mandy wants us to go in after dark. Makes sense, too much light and we'll get caught early. We want to get into position before they find out about us. Everyone knows what the target looks like. Blonde guy, as angry as that hand guy. Seriously, think he even knows what chapstick is? I bet even his blood is dry and dusty. Ah. She was saying one thing but still smiling in spite of herself, clearly giddy. Still, I think I can have a little fun while we're hitting our goal tilde. As long as everyone remembers the goal. The burned man shook his head, taking charge of this mess. I'll start the forest fire to the southwest of the camp, which, if they're still doing their little game, should separate the classes a little. We don't know where this Bakugo kid's gonna be, so everyone keep an eye before you attack. And if we don't see him? The bondage guy leaned forward. No one was really sure if he could see anything with his face covered and his entire body bound together, but no one was really worried about him. Well, if you don't see him, attack right. The first and largest Manuel, largest human, slammed his fists together as he smiled. And keep an eye on the Nomu. They're so stupid they might accidentally kill him if we're not paying attention. The scarred man gestured to the Nomu with a nod and everyone turned to look at the Nomu they'd been given by the man in the chair himself. 20 large Nomu were sitting in absolute silence with those freakish faces, waiting for the word to start the operation. Some were massive with muscles like steel cables while others were thin and wiry, ready to pounce like snakes. Not even the vanguard knew exactly what these Nomu could do or if they'd win against them in a straight fight, but they'd be serving as the main distraction and attacking force. The vanguard just had to sit back and pick out the target and pick off anyone who got in their way. Everyone was excited. Since they joined the league nothing very big had happened, but after getting equipment and some small attacks this was the big one. The scarred man smiled as he looked out through the forest towards the vague sight of lasers being fired into the sky and massive pillars of fire and ice, a trail that only an idiot would miss. Looks like it's almost time for it, the beginning of the end. Chapter end notes. Yo-yo eating the computer out the window yo. Once again a chapter that took way longer than it had any goddamn right to. Seriously, this chapter only took 5 hours in total to finish but so many days to plan out and it's very similar to the last one. What the fuck? Alright, I'm being a little sarcastic and not 100% honest, so I'm gonna put what happened in here because I pretend no one reads it therefore no one cares. I fucked up a few things in a very weird way, so I'm gonna get the big one out of the way. I forgot one of the biggest things in writing, the tone. Tone is all about the mood you set, and in case you're an idiot like me this last arc is supposed to serve sort of as the last test between the hero Midoriya wanted to be and the villain he should be, sort of a dreams versus reality thing if you like that route. It's a big decision for him and, truth be told, the choice was pretty obvious for a long time. And here I am unable to keep a consistent tone. If I rewrote this I'd tone down the happy stuff but I'd also lighten up on most of Wraith's moments. This ping-pongy tone does somewhat suit the narrative, but I'm willing to bet if you read all of this in one sitting it'd feel like an emotional roller coaster. Should have planned them out a little better, might be. A few of the other problems. I could not find out what Mina's real hero motivation is so I made it up. This isn't something I'm likely to go back and fix because instead of saying her own she just started saying whatever reason she could think of to be a hero since it doesn't matter that much to the overall narrative. Well, I say that, but I don't know her motivation yet. Who knows, she could change my mind. Other problem is, in canon, the League of Villains Love for Short shows up on the second day with 7 members because they're missing 3. I completely forgot about this because I was just rewatching the training scene and stopped watching when the coda scene came up. However, because I always have an excuse. The Love showing up on the second day or missing members makes no goddamn sense. They have a teleporter for fuck's sake and we know everyone started at the bar, so did some of them decide to be morons and take a cab to the camp? Teleporting in is the safest and most secretive way to get into the camp, plus we know Kurogiri knows where the camp is because he teleports them out. If you teleport in, you don't have to worry about getting seen on the road. If you teleport in, you don't have to worry about travel time. If you teleport in, there's no risk of having to wait for teammates on location like the League of Villains did because you can wait in a safe space. Seriously, in canon the League is just hiding on a cliff. They 100% should have been seen by Ragdoll's search quirk, because if she can't find them then her quirk just doesn't work. Plus, it's way more dangerous than just teleporting in and more likely to get seen early, which is why in this fanfic the League is inside the abandoned military site that Mao and Midoriya used to test fire some of their guns. That's about it, I'm going to go into the next chapter now. Hope this ending wasn't too cringe, adios. Chapter 139. Chapter Summary. The fun times wrap up as things get serious and the super safe camp reveals how not so safe it really is. Chapter Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Kaminari and Sensei flew through the forest, now properly exchanging attacks as they jumped off of and over the rebel. Yellow Thunderbolt met Black Blur in a clash of blades over and over, forcing Kaminari to act as fast as he could. Both flew in separate directions after an exchange of kicks, sliding and rolling to a stop before facing each other again. Ronin, his teacher, stood tall as he put his sword between bicep and forearm, pulling it through his arm to clean off the dust was standing dramatically. This will be our last exchange today, Kaminari. Don't hold back. Kaminari nodded and sheathed his sword, crouching to get in position. He'd go in with a thunderclap and flash since that was the move he practiced the most, and with the revisions they'd been making to his drawing cut, it also doubled as his strongest attack. They'd hit each other dead on and whoever's attack was the weakest would go down, so this was all about power. About 30 feet away Ronin slowly moved back, building more distance as he also sheathed his sword. Ronin had only been using attacks that Kaminari knew to keep their match even, so he was either going to use thunderclap and flash or bolt. Bolt took an extra second to come out, so if Kaminari just aimed low, he could try to crush the flash and outtrace the bolt by hitting first. Kaminari nodded one more time to hype himself up then took one last breath in before charging. His body was covered in electricity as he jolted forward, quickly building speed and momentum as he approached, keeping his eyes locked on Ronin's sword. Ronin also moved forward just a second later, moving much more slowly than his electrified student but each step carried more weight. Ronin wasn't planning to outpace him, he had something else in mind. Kaminari could at least figure this out but didn't have the time to figure out what that was. In almost an instant they went from 37 feet apart to just under 3 feet apart, and in that instant two swords were explosively drawn. Kaminari's sword rocketed out of his sheath and into his right hand as he cut across his body, aiming at about the waist. It would be difficult to attack and block such a low attack, especially since his sword was nearly perpendicular to the ground. Kaminari put a lot of faith into this attack but kept his eyes fixed on the strongest thing in the world, that sword. Ronin's hand flicked his sword up but not out of the sheath as Ronin twisted his body. Only 5 inches of the blade were exposed as Ronin's right hand locked onto the katana's handle with a grip like a vice, holding it still and blocking. Kaminari's sword was only being held with one hand while Ronin's was being held with his belt, his left arm, and his right arm. It was no competition whose sword was knocked back as they came into contact. Kaminari's arm stung like he just tried to punch a wall after hitting a seemingly immovable object that made his heavy attack bounce off like a ping-pong ball, but he didn't give up. The force of hitting something so hard pushed him backward and Kaminari went with that force, stepping backward and going into a second attack from a new angle in seemingly the same instant. And again the strongest thing in the world rose up. Kaminari went for an overhead slash as Ronin turned his body the other way, pulling his body left while his sword arm pulled right. It was like no, it wasn't like. Ronin used his entire body to draw a sword just so he could deflect one attack. Kaminari's sword hit Ronin's right as Ronin raised it above his head, but now Kaminari was using both hands while Ronin used one. Kaminari also had gravity and stuff on his side, so his attack powered through Ronin's but not before Ronin had managed to derail the attack, making Kaminari missing by shunting his sword to the side. Kaminari's sword swung wide as Ronin stood still as stone. While Ronin seemed scary when he was running in, Kaminari was sure that this was his real fighting style. He couldn't see his teacher's eyes underneath that badass black helmet that looked way cooler than his usual bandana, but he could feel the confidence and power that radiated off of his teacher now. Ronin's block switched into an attack. He had raised his sword over his head to block Kaminari's swing, so he also performed an overhead slash with one hand. This was Ronin's real style, sitting back and capitalizing off his opponent's style. It required a kind of patience that Kaminari could only imagine, being able to sit back until the last second while watching danger approach before reacting in a split second to hit whatever was coming at you. Kaminari couldn't sit still like that. He could do things for a long time, but he always needed to be doing something. That's why the second his sword missed he started trying to bring it back. Instead of trying to block Ronin's overhead though he leaned into his own weakness. If he always needed to be doing something, he'd always attack. Kaminari's sword had fallen to about his hip from missing his own overhead in the sudden shift in weight. That was about the right position for thunderclap and flash. He spoke so quickly it was barely a word, but he shifted into a backward thunderclap and flash. He usually used his right hand when doing the flash, but now he let go with his right hand for the most mobility possible and stepped into Ronin's attack, defending himself by just attacking more. Ronin was forced back, quickly lowering his sword to block Kaminari's sudden attack. Ronin had the two-handed grip and gravity on his side, so he'd definitely win this normally. That just meant Kaminari couldn't let this be normal. Kaminari shifted his entire body into the attack, slamming their shoulders together as he pressed on the attack. Their swords clashed together as he focused everything on pushing into Ronin, forcing himself to stay close but that was like running into a fire. Kaminari had the momentum but it was like pushing a mountain. Ronin's feet seemed to be stuck fast on the ground and his grip was so strong it was like the sword was pulled into his hand, not flinching for even a moment. Right until Kaminari shouted again. Jab. He'd seen Kirishima practicing this weird punch and even tried it a few times and now was as good as ever to try it out. His right hand flailed into the scene and struck Ronin upside the head. Believe it or not, however, punching a pitch black helmet hurt like fuck. But while Kaminari's hand hurt, that sudden unexpected move had put Ronin on the back foot for just a second, letting Kaminari literally tackle his own sword to push it forward and dully tap Ronin in the neck. Ronin once again collected himself quickly while Kaminari's sword flopped onto him, having put all his energy into that last exchange. It probably hadn't even taken 3 seconds in real time, but for Kaminari it felt like an eternity as Ronin glanced down at the sword with no edge resting on his neck and nodded. Excellent work, Kaminari. Don't give up now. His teacher dropped his sword and used both hands to help Kaminari stand up, looking him over. Do you have any injuries from that final exchange? You pushed yourself very hard. Yeah, I'm fine. Just went a little too hard into that last one. Now that he had a second, Kaminari checked out his right hand, the one he tried to punch a helmet with. Little sword, but I don't think I broke anything. Kaminari did some practice flexes while Sensei kicked up his sword, catching it midair and sheathing it dramatically. Broken knuckles are nothing to scoff at, let me see. Sensei checked his hand, poking some of the knuckles before stepping back. You should be fine, but don't try to punch people in the head in the future without proper protection. There are better ways to hit people than with your knuckles if you can't get that protection. There are. Ooh, like what? Kaminari and Sensei picked up their things and made their way out of the camp as the sun began to really start dropping behind the mountains. Elbows, knees, but mostly palm strikes. I'll show you some tomorrow. Water. Yeah, thanks. Wraith returned to the camp and brought with him the break period that everyone seemed to look forward to. The teachers could stop paying attention and the students could stop working, so everyone enjoyed it. Kaminari sat down to rest and relax before he went back into practice. His swordsmanship was below average at best, but his movement and improvisation was good enough to balance him back out to above average. When his swordsmanship became more refined, he'd be great in melees, especially when he started to use his quirk more. And after one good student came to the other, Bakugo. Wraith had no idea going in that Bakugo would be such a good student, but all of Bakugo's problems came from his personality. If you just looked at the results, he was perfectly fine. Extremely powerful but didn't know restraint, as his recent blast to the fast attested. Bakugo, we'll keep training your focused shot. We're going to go for more moving targets. Wraith told Bakugo in plain and simple targets what they'd be doing in advance to avoid future confusion. Any questions? Nah, sir. They exchanged nods and went their separate ways during the 10-minute break, one speaking to his fellow students while the other spoke to his enemies. Any signs of security breach today, Ragdoll? They had avoided talking with her all day, but Wraith did want to bring it up every day just to check in. He was also going to do it towards the end of the day so that if there had been any issues throughout the day he would know. Nope, Tilda. Everything's going peachy, mister. She was talking like he was her father or something similar. This act the wild pussycats was annoying at best. It was like she was purposely trying to annoy him. And Koda, where is he? Wraith made it his business to know where everyone was since no one else seemed to care. He didn't care either, but if someone went missing he'd at least like to know before someone tried to grab him as well. Koda's back on the cliffs, he spends a lot of time there. Mandalay turned her eyes to cliffs through the trees, placing a hand under her chin as she shook her head, looking slightly mournful. I was hoping he'd spend some time with the students and make some friends, but he doesn't seem to want anything to do with them. He wants nothing to do with you either, Wraith said it bluntly with all the emotion of the corpses he was named after. With an age gap that large and such different interests, why would he want to get close to the students? Such thinking is illogical. Ah, what makes it worse is that you're right. Mandalay seemed distraught about this, but of course he was right. He was Wraith. This was just a matter of obvious facts, even a complete imbecile could figure this out. It was just hard to say it out loud, but Wraith was designed to make the tough calls. I kind of hope that he'd grow to like heroes if he was around some students like them. You do not fix hydrophobia by surrounding someone with either the ocean or sailors. It was a strange comparison, but it'd work. Wraith stared blankly and coldly at the idiot in front of him, drilling through her frankly stupid ideas with basic logic. Wraith checked the time. He was 2 minutes into the break. 2 minutes and 10 minutes would be close enough. Maybe, someday, he'll meet someone who can be his hero. Someone who can save him. Yes, and maybe, someday, you could do it yourself and become his hero. Someone who at least pays attention to him. Bakugo, we're leaving now before I kill Mandalay. Get ready. Wraith barely got to sit down to talk to the failures pretending to be heroes before he got back up and went for the forest, shoving his hands deep into his pockets before he settled on strangling Mandalay. How many more days did this camp last? Teach Backwood was definitely pissed, but he funneled it all into teaching. He didn't take it out on anyone, he just stoically threw the rebel into the air and gave Bakugo feedback. Bakugo could respect the strong, but that thing with Mandalay was basically as up his alley as you could get. Teach Backwood wasn't scared of authority or of pissing off the weak, he was honest and straight. Didn't like it? Tough. Get stronger. Now Bakugo smiled as he tore through targets with the old man, adjusting and shifting with his teacher. Good reaction speed, Bakugo, but don't rush it. You keep clipping the bottom of targets because you're shooting slow, so instead wait a second. His teacher held up a target to demonstrate his point. These targets are the fastest right after I throw them, and they only get slower the longer they go up until they start falling. If you wait for just half a second you'll get an easier shot, and then you can line it up and nail them. Plus, if someone's stupid enough to approach from the air, they'll fall further. Got it, just give me 2 more. Bakugo smiled as he got back into position. Waiting half a second. He could see how fast they were flying up, give a rough guess about where they'd end up, then aim for that point. His eyes and hand rose as Teach Backwood threw 2 pieces up at the same time. Bakugo could try to stop and recalculate for each shot, or he could link them together, firing one shot right after the other. He'd recalculate. Better aim, and these were small targets. He shot the first one out of the air right before it reached its peak and shot the second right as it began to fall, when they were at their slowest and were the easiest to hit. Alright, you see that shit? Impressive, and a quick learner. You make quite the sharpshooter for someone who mostly fights close range, a scary combination. Teach Backwood laughed, his earlier anger, frustration, whatever it was, he covered it up pretty well. Now, is something on your mind, Bakugo? The shit you said to the red cat one. Bakugo didn't have a clue who she was, and he cared even less than he knew about her. Just on my mind, it's nothing. Let's keep going. Bakugo said that and they did continue, but it stuck with him. It wasn't a major distraction or anything, he was Katsuki Bakugo after all, but it kept running through his head. Hey, Teach Backwood. Teach Backwood stopped just before he threw 4 objects into the air for Bakugo to hit and locked eyes with him. Yes, Bakugo, do you have a question? No, nothing like that. I was just thinking about what you said again. Bakugo quickly shot back, then went back to thinking. Thinking about what you said about heroes. That's a lot of thinking and a lot of abouts. Want to talk about it? Nah. Alrighty. Teach Backwood didn't even try to get into after his head, resting against a tree. Tell me if you need help then or when you're ready to continue. Don't you wanna ask what's going on? Yes. Teach's response was quick and sharp like everything he did, but he reined it back as he spoke. But it's yours to decide if you want help. You can lead a man to water, but you can't make him drink. That's what Mandalay didn't realize. Mandalay. That sounded like one of those cat weirdas names, and given the situation it was obvious that was the red one. So is that the brat's problem? He doesn't want help. No, he definitely wants help. He just doesn't know how to ask for it. Teach's head flicked to a random direction, towards some random cliffs. Bakugo's head worked fast as he remembered that they said the brat hung out on cliffs as he put it together. He's like a certain weakling I know. Weakest shit in the world. Can't make a decision to save his life, and nearly gotten both of us killed a couple of times because of it. Sounds like a pain in the ass. Definitely. Teach nodded and smiled. Despite his age, the man didn't seem to have very many wrinkles, and it seemed because of how rarely he smiled or something. Most of the time Teach's expression was so blank you'd think he was a corpse. Indecisive, idiotic, and illogical. A nuisance on every perceivable level. But, I'll never stop trying to help him. He couldn't make out Teach's expression now as he faced the cliffs. He needs the help even if he doesn't admit it. He might not even know he needs it, but that doesn't matter. Someday, he'll realize it and someday he'll take my help, but until then, I'll just keep on offering it. And someone needs to be there for that brat too. Someone he'll be around, someone he can trust, someone who can understand what he's going through. Maybe they can't do it today. Maybe they can't do it tomorrow. But if they just keep trying. Teach stopped looking at that cliff, wiping his face. It's quite hot today it seems. I'm getting distracted and off point. How annoying. Teach smiled as he faced Bakugo again. How unprofessional. I apologize. Are you ready to continue? Why yeehaw, of course I am. Bakugo snapped back to reality and shook off his weird thoughts about some random weak nerd he last saw back in middle school. Throw the rocks, damn it. Two more arrived while they were checking their gear. What the fuck were you two doing, you damn lizard? Polishing your fucking swords again. Yes. Oh, that's not the right answer is ICK. For some reason, that idiot didn't see it coming when the larger man grabbed him by the throat and lifted him with inhuman speed as he grew even larger at will. Put him down. If you're going to get pissed at anyone, get pissed at whoever's last. We're still missing one, and we're not starting till he shows up. The burned man sat in the dim light playing cards boredly, glancing around. Shit. Anyone know who the last guy is and where the fuck they are? We're getting started soon. I don't know we don't. We don't know anything. The wannabe Deadpool, the other late arrival, argued with himself as he casually joined in the card guard, never ceasing his internal argument all the while. Aiden shut up. The last one's that smoke guy, the purple one. Kurogiri, was it? I don't think we can get pissed at him, I'm afraid. The circus performer dealt in the schizophrenic and sat back. It seems the last one to arrive is our ride, but that won't be much of a problem. Will he be joining us? He's not a real part of the vanguard action. What was it again? The burned man rubbed his head as he tried to remember the full name. Something stupid. The arguably most masculine there one got a chuckle trying to remember the name. But that weird hand kid isn't here, so let's call it Vanguard or something easy to remember and say. It's the Vanguard Action Squad, you were just missing one word. The lizard quickly piped back up once he recovered from nearly getting his head crushed like a grape. Yeah, we'll just go with Vanguard like she said. The burned man nodded to the masculine one, then checked his cards and scowled, almost burning them before stopping himself. Shit luck again. Sorry, this one's a little singe. The circus performer collected the cards again and checked the time, humming to himself. It's all fine. It looks like tonight's show will go swimmingly now, with all the performers gathered. I don't believe Kurogiri will be fighting with us. I hope not, he's supposed to be our exit goddammit, a pair of fucking twos. The dead ringer for Deadpool tossed his cards and grabbed his head. Arg, could someone tighten my mask please? Shut up. Everyone knows where they go. Scars looked around but while most nodded the big man laughed. You and I are the only ones doing something different, dumbass. I start at the cliffs and we meet at the building after making your little fire. The large man leaned against the wall. Would it kill someone to include a map of this dump? It's not exactly a military compound. Even if it was, I've busted up a couple with this biker I know. Japan's military doesn't even have guns. Yes it does have guns and yes, we do have a map. Calm the fuck down. The masculine woman shook her head. It just doesn't help because the map is all trees. Seriously, we already knew this place was in a forest, this map doesn't tell us anything. There should be a path going south, and that's where we meet all the little kitties. Toga, you're a little kitty. You're the youngest one here. The burned man looked at his new hand of cards and sighed, while the real youngest one there adjusted his gas mask and coughed but no one noticed. Well, shit, I'm bored. FSSSSH tilde. Kurogiri's portal created a strange sound as he materialized in the middle of the room atop twice his disregarded cards. Then be bored no more. It's time. All of the villains smiled as they stood up, grabbing their equipment and unifying. All these minor problems and squabbles disappeared as they were united for a common cause. They were a team after all. Kurogiri did one last checkup on everyone from the small-time criminals to the nomus in the back before nodding. Now then, let's begin. Chapter and notes. Yo yo yigati yo, 2 chapters in 2 days. The fuck is this? The fuck is happening? The fuck am I? Enough fucks though, let's get this train wreck a backwood rolling. The end is in sight. I'm almost free of this camp and my least favorite arc, cause holy fuck do I hate the summer training camp. If you couldn't tell by my constant complaints all coming out at this part, this is in my opinion one of the weakest arcs in BNHA, but I've complained enough to fill a second fanfic with just complaints. Let's focus on this train wreck instead of the train wreck of an arc it's based on. Really trying to push the league in these parts. I probably should have started mentioning them about 10 chapters ago. I probably wouldn't them always have the ending segment like they do here, but I'd at least start mentioning more than pretending they don't exist. Oh well, hindsight is 2020 and that was the COVID year, so through the transitive property we now know hindsight sucks. Anyways. Having a good time fleshing out Wraith by having him interact with some other people. Trying to keep him pretty consistent as the second most emotionless persona, with the big exceptions being when people go directly against his ideals like Midoriya and Mandalay who have very similar ideas in some respects. Nothing shows personality like getting pissed off, so therefore nothing shows the mark of a good artist like pissing off halfway through their own ending notes. Adios. Chapter 140, yet here we are. Chapter notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. The vanguard of the League of Villains assembled up, everyone standing up and doing one last talk. The scarred man looked over everyone, nodding before turning. Alright everyone, the targets of this blonde kid in the Wild Pussycats, Ragdoll. Oh, and remember Muscular that you're supposed to bring most of the Nomu. You'll be entering from the furthest point in the Nomu are. Big as shit and obvious as fuck. We get it. I'll look for your stupid fire, just do your job and I'll do mine. Muscular sounded angry, but he was smiling. He was in a killing mood and he'd probably get to off a few brats even if he was stuck with 20 brain-dead morons. He knew some of them before they got transformed and they were idiots before and after, but if it was what they wanted, who was he to judge? Everyone went through the portals in their own small groups, most with only 1 or 2 members and a single Nomu before the tidal wave that was muscular and the rest of the ugly bastards went in. Not all of them were humanoid, but together, they were going to carve this stupid little camp into the history of Japan as one of its largest massacres. Fine work Bakugo and Zero. Your aim has improved a lot recently. Wraith started by praising the student this hour had been focused on, then turned to the one who was taking time out of his own practice to help. And Zero, you've gotten quite good at throwing large objects. You can get off the cliff and meet us at the building, we're done for today. Of course it has, bastard. Gotcha sir, see ya there. The 3 returned to the main camp at their own paces and quickly separated. Bakugo stormed ahead with his signature stormy expression and foul mouth, stomping all the way. Zero took his own path back since he was on a cliff, over 100 feet away where he had been training and hitting a target with stones. Wraith took his time as he evaluated the day and their work, looking over the various spots inside this quickly darkening forest that the students had trained at. It had been a long day with a lot of people training very different things. Wraith was satisfied with the general pace that everyone learned and advanced at, even if their starting points could only be described as disappointing, but the real test would happen after they left this camp, and Wraith wasn't even talking about their next meetings. Well, he wasn't just talking about their next meetings. Would they continue to train on their own and continue to improve, using the camp as a springboard? Or would they be like Kaminari had been and never advance past what he taught them here? Would they survive in the harrowing world once it got overturned? To be dramatic, a lot of the kids here would die in a real combat situation, plain and simple. Would they adapt and change before their society turned to shit, or would they crumble with the shift? And of course, those next meetings. Nobody could give him a good answer if they could give him an answer at all. Most people hadn't seemed to put much thought into it, pursuing heroism because it was cool or paid a lot. Would they be able to find some real motivations to save people before they met again? Midoriya took off his helmet and rubbed his head. It was a lot to think about, but of course it was. It was the future, it was everything after this moment in a lot of people's lives. It was astronomically huge. If this plan worked, it would affect all of Japan and maybe even all of the world. But did he want that? Midoriya looked down at his hands, nervously smiling. His hands were shaking. They'd been shaking since lunch and he couldn't say why. That just made him more nervous and made his hands shake more. But he had a plan and a path to follow. Midoriya wiped the sweat off his head with an arm and returned to camp, glancing around. Of course the other adults left all the work for him even though it had been dinner time for 6 minutes. Since he had been shouting out all the breaks, they left it to him to shout out when the meals were too. Damn bastards. Alright everyone, pack it up. Dinner time, so wash up and start coming over to get your food. Midoriya picked up the coat and bags he left before training and made his way to the food storage, quickly washing up before getting into a rhythm as he handed out food to the kids. The wild pussycats joined up eventually, and soon the students were cooking and arguing again. Midoriya hung back, glancing around and doing a head count. No Kota again. His eyes glared at Mandalay, the heroine who located herself as far from him as she could. She noticed his gaze but purposely avoided it. It wasn't just Wraith who she was annoying now as he shook his head and turned back. Come on pussycats, pick your food. We're eating too. Vlad, Eraserhead, hurry up and get something to eat, I'm not here all night. Everyone, not just the students, now went out to cook and talk. The adults banded together against him, shunning him without words, but he was used to that. One of the benefits of being quirkless was he got used to being ignored. Petty stuff like this was what 6-year-olds did when they were upset and didn't bother him in the slightest. Midoriya had wondered if Mandalay would get in his face and confront him about what he said, but her reaction suggested that she agreed with Wraith's words. But agreeing did nothing if you didn't do anything. Midoriya sat by himself as he cooked more rice, checking the time as he adjusted the fire. This was going to take a while. Dabi walked through the woods, checking the trees. They knew there was a telepath so they'd have to wait outside her range, but until he went to meet up with everyone he wouldn't even take one step in her direction. All he had to do was easy, cause a fire. Dabi now checked trees for a good one to start it. Coming close there seemed to be a large string of fires recently. The wood was pretty good and had been dried already, this would be a nice and big fire. Dabi wished they had communicators, would have made this whole mess so much easier. But he'd live without it. He checked the moon. If the word they got was good, tonight was supposed to be some stupid test of courage shit. The teachers would spread everyone out in the woods, then. He stopped his fire as he cut off his smile. It wasn't time yet, but soon. He wanted them to be a little ways into the test of courage so that a lot of people would be inside the forest and cut off, that way they could take full advantage of the carnage and capture the target. Not yet, not yet. But soon. Dabi was barely aware of his smile as more fire crept across his body. He could barely feel the burn anymore. Soon. Now, we've filled our bellies and washed the dishes. Pixie Bob managed to say all of that without externally cringing. It was good to see she had a spine for something. Next Tilda. It's time for the test of courage. Mina was the first to cheer, literally jumping with joy. The other Exam F kids joined in, namely Kaminari, Kirishima, Zero, and Sato if you were paying attention to the big man in the back. We're gonna test it. But will the Exam F kids be joining us? And it only took one sentence to make almost all of Exam F freeze in place before pivoting to look at the speaker, Momo. She had a look of deep contemplation for something as laid back as a test of courage. Yeah, will they be a part of this since they flunked their finals? Now the other students were weighing in on this while Exam F went beyond frozen and became statues, petrified on the spot. No Tilda. Yes, they're joining you. Midoriya didn't bother to stand up from the bench where he was relaxing as he spoke, a little confused about this whole mess. Yes Tilda. Why wouldn't they be? Their punishment is they're stuck with me, not that they get to miss events. Midoriya understood that Exam F should be punished, but they were being punished already. Doubly so since they were stuck with Eraserhead as a teacher, the prick. Oh, that makes sense. Thank you, instructor. The person bowed and Midoriya squinted as he tried to recognize them. Was that Iida the robot? He was definitely doing the choppy motions, so it probably could be him. Yes, we're gonna be tested. The students went straight back into saying the weirdest things without batting an eye while Midoriya's question went unanswered. But it was unlikely that anyone had a good answer anyway. Wraith rolled his eyes, just adding this event to the string of confusing behavior at UA. Pixie Bob was probably the one who thought up the test of courage since she decided to explain it all herself, even outlining what everyone would be doing with a map of the forest. Class 1B was going to be the scares while 1A ran through in pairs with a 3-minute gap, going through the forest to grab tags with their names on them and then coming back. Those being the scares aren't allowed to make direct contact. Show us how scary you are with your quirks. Direct contact like hitting one another. So I can throw rocks at all of them and be fine. Just say no touching, no need to get wordy. The class that makes the most people piss their pants with creativity and imagination wins. Tiger shouted that so triumphantly, but should people really be saying the phrase piss their pants with such confidence? Plus, what did the class win? 1 hour off training, extra food, what? The wild pussycats were definitely going wild with their poses when Jiro stuck in and said what was exactly on his mind. Stop it. That's filthy. I see. Iida spoke again, spouting more nonsense with his signature robot hand chops. Midoriya wondered if those hand motions would become one of Ingenium's super moves. They're trying to make us refine our ideas by competing against each other, giving us more options for our quirks in the process. As expected of UA. Isn't this just standard rules for a test of courage? Midoriya muttered from his bench, completely confused about whatever the fuck Iida was talking about. The standard rules were no touching, 2-person groups, and retrieve an item as proof that you did it. They just had 2 groups of students so they'd switch off so everyone could go through. No one seemed to hear Midoriya's confused questions as everyone barreled onward. Now, you'll draw lots to determine your partners. Pixie Bob barreled onward, ignoring basically everything anyone else said, but that was probably for the best after Tiger and Iida's ramblings. Everyone started talking and trying to trade partners as the whole scene became a loud mess. The pussycats seemed to content to watch the chaos unfold as Ragdoll ran into the forest. She was supposed to be at the halfway point with the name tags. That left 1A and the rest of the pussycats a little outside the forest and across from the main building. The group slowly shaped as Pixie Bob continued to maintain control over the situation, giving 1B a few minutes to get in position and set up. The UA teachers saw that they had nothing to do with this and went inside the building. They seemed determined to connect to their students as little as possible, but then again, Midoriya wasn't hanging around either so he couldn't exactly point fingers. Midoriya left the group quietly and made his way around the building. He didn't go far, just enough to give himself some room while he did what he wanted. The groups could still see each other if they looked hard, but while 1A and the pussycats were standing in the light, Midoriya settled for just squinting. The starlight would be ample for what he wanted to do. He was still wearing his hero outfit, but then again that was the only thing he'd been wearing the whole time. He'd had one hell of a time cleaning it each night, but there was no substitute in his mind. Midoriya stopped admiring the clothes that Kaminari made fun of and reached into the tail of the coat, drawing out 3 sticks and joining them together. While the students went through the woods spooking each other, Wraith got back to grips with the spear. He kept it in quarterstaff form, no reason to turn it on and waste battery, but his motions were quick and precise as he cut through the air. It was no knife edge, but even a blunt stick sliced through the air if the user was good enough. Thrusts and slashes all weaved together as Wraith got back into the flow with spear fighting. It had been a long time since he seriously used one of these things, but he could see himself using it a lot. The reach of a spear was quite valuable in a fight, and Wraith was now testing that reach as he stepped up and into the range of a tree, going straight into practice combat against a solid object. Wraith was entirely focused on the spear now as he put his entire body into each attack, letting his thoughts drift aimlessly as he worked. He made minor adjustments to his grip between strikes to ensure each had weight behind it and flowed into the next, combining each attack to form a strange dance as he began to weave in steps and dodges against an imaginary opponent. Against a goddamn tree, he was performing better combat than most UA students would see in person for the rest of their lives and pulling out moves that they couldn't even imagine themselves performing. Wraith switched from the rapid stabs to a sudden slash with the tip of the quarterstaff, then rebounded off the tree and quickly switched ends as he continued his barrage. They talked big, but when it came down to the brass tacks those children couldn't measure up. They settled for big flashy moves when they should be striving for small quick strikes. Wraith, if he was allowed to go all out. Wraith's barrage stopped as he shook off these pointless thoughts. Wastes of time. He ditched his jacket and grabbed water for himself, glancing at the crowds of children outside the forest for their test of courage. Wraith's expression was fixed somewhere between anger and disappointment as he spoke, eyes fixed on the conglomerate just outside the woods. They will not change. They're improving. Bakugo managed to shoot 6 targets. That's not it. Wraith took another drink and set it down, getting back into the flow as his motions became faster and faster. In a single second his spear could now fully extend from his body, hit his target, then return. He was back to the level he had been at before. We heard their reasons for being heroes. Manliness, fame, power, TCH. Wraith's arms had become tense as he spoke, not a good sign for combat. A tense arm was slower. He forced himself to take a deep breath or two before getting back into it. They did have reasons to become a hero, if they really tried they could change. Someone is a thief because they steal, someone is a chef because they cook, and people are heroes because commit heroic actions. In this line, heroes achieve manliness, fame, and power by performing heroic actions. These children are trying to achieve the effect while skipping the cause. Wraith's tone was factual even as he moved, driving the spear with loose motions before tightening just before impact to go just a little faster. They will not change. Wraith was completely calm as his speed continued to creep up, going faster and faster as the quarterstaff rebounded off the tree. The quarterstaff bouncing off the tree helped Wraith pull it back in and ready it for another attack, a trick he used to keep increasing that speed of his. In 3 years or 20, what they want will not change. Someday they will enter the real world, and while they may gain the skills to be real warriors along the way, they will never gain the traits to be real heroes. Not while what they want remains the same. And you. Wraith's grip tightened as he stepped back, scowling fully now. What do you want? A safer world, a better world. That's a marketing line from some 2-bit company trying to sound nice and you damn well know it. Wraith wasn't even frustrated no, he was frustrated. Wraith was annoyed and frustrated and so many other things he could never begin to describe with the facts and logic he loved so much. The students' responses might have been bad, some downright idiotic, but at least they were true. Yet here we are. We don't want to be here and you know it. Wraith looked back at the body of students as they were sent into the forest. We knew from the start this was a waste of time, that UA was as corrupt and horrible as the rest. Yet here we are. He didn't know why they were there anymore. He didn't want to be stuck afar from everyone in the middle of nowhere, he didn't want to hurt anyone, he didn't want so much, and yet. No answer again. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Wraith shook his head as he disassembled the quarterstaff back into pieces. Next up was firearm practice, so he was gonna have to pick some targets. Wait. Wraith stopped, lifting his head into the air. There was a distinct smell in the air like a campfire, and if he turned he could see a strange blue light spreading across the forest. Fire. Todoroki's not on the scarer team so he shouldn't be using his quirk, and the fire's not on the trial path. Midoriya's head worked quickly to deduce the details of what was happening as the conglomerate of students and crows in the distance seeming to panic. Even Mao could have drawn the right conclusion from this mess. So that means, we're being attacked. Chapter and notes. Yo yo yagi yo. This chapter got released eventually through many writing issues, all of them petty and stupid. But hey, it happened in the end and that's what really matters. Probably, not that I'd know, I'm not a real writer. Since I'm not a real writer I'm not gonna talk a lot about what happened in this chapter and instead talk about behind the scenes stuff. The scene right before the League of Villains fully attacks but after the teachers finish explaining the test of courage was really hard to write, probably because it was linked to a canon scene. The things Pixie Bob says while explaining the test are all canon and kind of cringy but so's my writing, so continuing that was hard but necessary. In canon, Midoriya is one of the latter students to go into the test of courage but he's not going to be here, so the readers needed to know where he was, what he was doing, and why. Originally he was just going to be sitting around while the students went into the test of courage, but that was boring and lacked motion. It would have been a much more boring and one-sided scene if there was no motion, even if the motion isn't that interesting like Kaminari and Midoriya talking while cleaning swords. This one would have been especially bland since, if they're around other people, there'd be no talking out loud. I really like these conversations when one has the ability to talk out loud because it shows who's dominant at the time. Another complaint because my petty problems are endless was the topic. We've heard this debate between Wraith and Midoriya what, 20, 30 times by now. It's been like 40 chapters, over a month, and we haven't moved an inch. Damn. But that's an issue on my part. If I can't make the central problem of this story interesting, that's me fucking it up. I say that like all the problems in this story aren't my fault, but you get the idea. We've been to this debate a few too many times. Also, for whoever's wondering, we finally made it to the end of BNHA Season 3 Episode 3. Only took how many chapters? Chapter 141. Chapter notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Far away from the stupid heroes and their stupid test of courage, Kota sat on his hideout cliff, kicking his feet as he stared out into the sky. He really liked nature. His parents used to take him to parks and stuff, but it was never this big. He lived in the city for their work even though he rarely got to see them, but some of the few good times they had together were spent outside. They went to the beach once. They taught him a little about their quirks then, about water pressure and other stuff. Kota didn't get it, but he enjoyed it anyway. Kota snapped out of it, shaking his head and cursing. Those days were long gone now, and he should just stop thinking about them. Besides, if anyone really cared for him, they wouldn't keep leaving him alone. He didn't even mean to have a hideout here. He just wandered off once and couldn't find anyone. He was alone for hours before he tried to go to the tallest thing he could see, these cliffs. He then waited there a little longer before he saw where the building was and made his way back. And what did they say when he finally showed up? Oh, hey Kota. Oh, hey Kota. He'd been gone for fucking hours and they didn't even notice. He came here the second and third time just to see if they'd notice, but they never did. Nobody noticed if he missed meals or was gone for hours, they didn't even notice him. Kota's scowl grew deeper as he reflected on the past. He used to come here because he wanted to make sure, but now he knew. Nobody paid attention to him. Mandalay or whatever her stupid hero name was didn't care about him, she was just doing this because she had to. She was too busy with her stupid job, just like his parents, and now he might as well be all alone again. He used to have friends. He used to go to school and laugh with them, but now he was stuck all summer in the middle of nowhere with nothing to do and no one to talk to. He couldn't want for this stupid summer camp to end so he'd stop having to look at those fucking hero kids. Now those students trying to be heroes, they really pissed him off. Acting all friendly and stuff. Kota's frown got even deeper as he brushed off those thoughts about those stupid people trying to become the worst thing in the world. He even met more heroes, and they were also assholes. The tired guy was constantly hitting people with his weird scarf thing and yelling at them while the big red guy just stood back and did nothing. Then, that old grandpa guy. He was the first person to ever bother coming up the cliffs to find Kota. He said he wasn't a hero either, and he was definitely the least bad of the adults. He also was really honest, admitting tons of bad stuff about heroes like that they wanted money and other stuff. But he was teaching kids to be heroes, so he was still bad. Right, he admitted that he wanted to be a hero, but was that the same as being a hero? He was still bad, right? He was the first person to just sit down and listen to Kota though. They just talked, and he didn't give those hollow answers like everyone else did. He sounded like he really tried to answer Kota's questions, at least. He listened to Kota and didn't say anything fake. They died for you. You should be proud. It was such an honorable thing. Did no one care about him? Who cares about being proud or honorable? He just wanted to spend a little more time with them but their deaths were supposed to be a good thing. Even the guy at the gym said so. He thought that guy was his friend, but Kota's rapid flurry of thoughts were cut off as he noticed something, a smell in the air slowly drifting upward. Smoke. The students were confused by the smoke, but there was much of a panic yet. No, the panic started when Pixie Bob was surrounded by a pink aura, lifted off the ground and suddenly flung toward the forest, straight into a villain's attack. She could barely scream as she went down in a single hit, unable to defend herself as her head met solid metal. Pixie Bob, oh no. Mandalay and Tiger, the only pro heroes still standing in front of the test of courage, stepped in front of the 1A students defensively as three figures emerged from the woods, stepping over Pixie Bob's crumpled body. Those pet cats are in the way. The voice was loud and confident as the first intruder stepped forward with a smile. He was large and muscular with hair cut just above the shoulders and shades despite the late time. In his hand was a large metal box with one end still coated in a small splatter of blood from Pixie Bob. He rested the metal box atop the fallen hero's head, not quite putting weight onto it. Yet. WHY. Mineta took nervous steps backward, trying to process what they were seeing with their eyes. I thought they made doubly sure. Why are there villains here? Mandalay sent out a mental message to everyone while they squared off with the intruders. Everyone, we're being attacked by two villains and it's possible that there are more. I repeat, we are under attack by villains. Everyone who can move, get back to camp immediately. Even if you come across the enemy, retreat and do not engage. She sent it out to all the students, teachers, and Kota. If she just went for everyone except the villains she'd probably accidentally tell some of the villains that she didn't know about, so it was safer to be selective. Now Eraserhead and Vlad King should be on their way out to help. Foosh tilde. From behind there was a blast of blue flames, starting just outside. Some of the students' heads snapped back as everyone took a second to figure out what was happening. Another villain. How many are there? Ahem Tilda, how are you this evening, UA High School? The second villain, a lizard man covered in cloth and dressed like Stain, stepped in front of his teammates and spread his arms dramatically as he spoke. We are the Vanguard Action Squad of the League of Villains. The League of Villains. The students were definitely scared, stepping back behind the heroes while throwing nervous glances at the man throwing blue fire behind them. They could now distinctly see he was fighting someone. Why are they here? Shall I crush this girl's head? What do you think? Well, what do you think? The intruders were taking this very fast and very seriously for some reason as the large man started to put just a bit of weight on Pixie Bob's head. Instantly, Tiger broke rank and finally started to do something. Like I'd let you. Wait up, Big Sis Magna. Don't be hasty. The lizard stepped up in between the two groups, holding his hands up to try and keep one another from getting too close despite having 10 feet between himself and Tiger. You too, Tiger, calm down. It all depends on whether having power over life and death follows Stain's tenets or not. The lizard man made his side of villainy very clear, which made it more confusing why he was with the League of Villains of all groups. Magna, the girl, whatever or whoever they were, they stopped putting their weight onto Pixie Bob's head while the Nomu stood behind everything, smiling as a strange liquid dripped from its mouth. So you're the ones his ideology brought. Iida stated the obvious once again, finally getting some courage and stepping up. That's right, Imo, yeah you, the one with the glasses. The lizard had a big smile now, he liked being recognized for his Stain motivation it seemed. You were the one who brought the end of Stain at Hosu City. Now that was funny. Iida wasn't even able to move when Stain finally got co-ed, but he definitely was the only famous person out of it. Ingenium's little brother would be the media focus instead of some random kid, the son of two random heroes, who was in the area just because he'd been getting yogurt at the time. Ronin getting the credit was out of the question since he was a vigilante. I apologize for the late introduction. The lizard grabbed something off his back, a strange bag thing with a sword handle sticking out the bottom. He lifted it pretty easily and pointed it at Iida, the cover falling away to reveal dozens of blades belted together. I am Spinner, the one who will spin his dreams to reality. Once again Tiger proved he was at least the closest to being a real hero as he ignored the panache and style, stepping forward angrily. I don't care, but you bastards. The woman lying there, Pixie Bob, has started worrying about getting married recently. Alright, never mind the real hero thing, this was just as stupid. Tiger treated this so seriously which, when you looked from the outside, made this even dumber. She was doing her best to find happiness as a woman, despite her age. You can't damage that woman's face and then just stand there laughing thoughtlessly about it. That was what Tiger was pissed about. Man, he really was showing that he was a rescue hero. They were threatening to kill her and he was worried about something as stupid as though. What's a hero doing trying to be happy like an average person? Spinner kept on smiling as he charged forward but now it was Mandalay's turn to monologue. Tiger, I've broadcast instructions. Leave the safety of the other students to Ragdoll. Why, Pixie Bob, the one with the strongest quirk of all the pussycats, got one shot. She didn't even try to block an attack with her arms. Was she just the physically weakest of the bunch? Ragdoll wasn't going to be much better. The two of us will hold them here. Go, everyone. Listen carefully, do not fight. Class rep, you're in charge. Understood, let's go. Iida happily took charge and started trying to lead the students away but getting a laugh out of the criminals. And where do you think you're going, kids? Nomu. Magna hadn't even finished speaking before the Nomu launched into the air, soaring over everything and everyone before crashing into the ground and lurching up, piercing the air with a shrill scream as it surrounded the students. They were trapped. Koda's rapid flurry of thoughts were cut off as he noticed something, a smell in the air slowly drifting upward. Smoke. The forest glowed blue below him as something spread down below. Fire, fire, fire. Koda stood up and began to run down the cliff face until he heard a new sound, strange screams and voices from further up the cliffside. Shut up you stupid bitches. A heavy impact as a giant monster flew over the cliff, staring and screaming at Koda on the way down as he scuttled away from the ledge, holding in the urge to scream as he covered his mouth with both hands. The husky voice from above continued to speak. Go on ahead you damn freaks. Go on, beat it. Another two monsters went flying as they were lobbed off the top of the mountain, one bouncing off the same cliff face and locking eyes with Koda before it slid off. Koda pressed his back against the cliff wall, covering his mouth with both hands as he tried to remain as still as possible. Somebody Tilda was screaming fire earlier, and I'm in the mood for a warm-up kill Tilda. Deep laughter came from above as Koda scurried to try and hide as several strange noises blared out from above him. So come on. Let's go, let's hunt. From above Koda on the top of the cliffs, Muscular smiled beneath his stupid mask as he grabbed one last Nomu by the head, nearly crushing its skull with his grip strength along before his arm flickered, launching the ugly shit stain into the distance as he shouted, his voice echoing across the forest. Midoriya's eyes flickered to the mass amounts of movement on the cliff. Something was flying off of it. That was definitely a problem. If memory served, that was where Koda hung out, and he didn't think Koda had been at the fear thing. Shit. More things flew off the top of the cliff. Flying Nomu. Ahead Midoriya could see one Nomu as it jumped through the air, crashing to the ground, but he hadn't seen flying Nomu since Hosu City. Did all for one make more birds into Nomu? They certainly were plentiful enough to make a reliable source of Nomus, if you didn't mind your Nomus being even dumber than usual and having no fighting instincts. The giant Nomu in front of him rose, screaming as it did so. It was tall and thin with yellowish skin, so its body probably had a quirk. It had an unnaturally large mouth, which was probably its main method of attack. When large amounts of Nomu were in one place they didn't seem to have that many quirks in them, probably because each individual Nomu wasn't supposed to be great. They instead each had 3 to 4 quirks supporting a central idea or theme, like the first Nomu's many layers of defense. It didn't notice him as he charged in from behind, so its senses didn't seem to be enhanced. This Nomu was likely to be more focused on attack power than defense, judging by its thin frame and sickly form. They'd kill it in a single stroke so it had no chance of counterattacking, taking advantage of the element of surprise in its seemingly weak defenses. Wraiths sprinted down the path to build up speed before launching off the ground and into the trees, ricocheting of the trunks as they approached to add momentum to their attack in thunder-breathing, first form. They spun through the air like a top as they launched Yamato from its sheath with bullet propulsion, cutting clearly and cleanly through the Nomu's neck without any sign of resistance. After cutting through its neck they hit the ground with a roll, standing up as soon as they could and continuing to run forward towards the students with barely a glance at their kill. Thunderclap and flash. The Nomu's head bounced off the ground a second later and rolled behind them as the Nomu's body collapsed, twitching slightly. Midoriya ran past the students on his way to the next fight, pointing towards the main building down the path as he glared down the two villains who attacked. Go. Get inside the cafeteria. If anything gets in your way, defeat them, but your main goal is to run. Survive first. Got it. Wraith exchanged a glare with all of them, making sure they understood. But what about using our quirks? Iida was the one who asked it, and while it was the logical thing to ask, the fact that it had to be asked was a problem. Damn rules and laws. Do you want to die? Use the damn quirk. Wraith shook his head as he continued running. I'll take responsibility for it, but you're supposed to be heroes. Act like it. The monster bore its fangs as it crashed into the fight between the pros and intruders, reaching for Yamato again. Close by, the villain whose name Midoriya didn't hear was fighting Tiger. They both were pretty good with their brawling fighting style, constantly close and clashing, but it was very obvious that they were an even match at the time. Something would need to break the tie. A little further away Spinner and Mandalay were duking it out, both showing off how little skill they really had. Spinner was using some giant mess of blades like it was one sword, but while he was using the messy sword easily, his movements were messy. He was not trained in real swordsmanship, it seemed. Mandalay was focused entirely on dodging and surviving with barely any counterattacks. She'd definitely need the help and they needed her quirk, so the monster charged Spinner first. Unlike the pros and criminals who stood around talking, the monster only took 10 seconds to go from killing the Nomu to trying to gut Spinner. It covered ground like a bat out of hell as it leapt in front of Spinner, cutting his mess of a sword in half with a single stroke. What? My sword. Spinner took a second to figure out what happened as he backed away, then threw what was left of his mess at his new opponent before he was attacked again. Now Spinner was on the back foot, showing that he had been much more agile than Mandalay but wasn't going full force. Until now. The monster attacked from every direction, seemingly in the same instant. Everything in front of it was carved to ribbons as Spinner threw knives and needles until he just focused on dodging, trying just to survive the inhumane speed of a monster. Mandalay, did you tell the students they could use their quirks yet? The monster didn't bother to look at her as the weak spoke, thinking about other things. It was going to work for Al for one, so it probably shouldn't kill any of the League of Villains. But you didn't need both your legs or arms to live. It'd demonstrate its full power on anything stupid enough to get in its way. What? No, that's illegal. Mandalay, they're going to die. You can't even go one-on-one with one of these intruders with your quirk, how are they going to run away without their quirks? Wraith spoke the cold truth to her instead of playing nice, he had much bigger fish to fry as the weak restrained him. No killing again, what a bother. I will take responsibility, but I can't save them. Mandalay, I need you to tell them they can use their quirks, alright? Midoriya glanced back between attacks, making eye contact with Mandalay to try and drive this home. Spinner took this as a moment of weakness, drawing a second katana he had on his back. Do you think you can beat me without even look? The monster turned and kicked Spinner in the stomach, launching him off the ground and sending him flying backward. Unfortunately, however, I'm the only one who can right now, Mandalay, so. You're taking responsibility, right? Why did that matter? People were going to die if she didn't hurry up. Yes, just send the fucking message. Midoriya was losing patience as he drew kindness and took a few pot shots at the other intruder, the big buff guy, and hit him in the side to give Tiger an opening. Tiger immediately took it, stepping in when the intruder stepped back and hammering the criminal with punches. Thanks. You two should be able to take care of this from here, I'm going to go deal with the other Nomu. Midoriya took off running without barely a glance back, taking a parting shot in the vague direction of Spinner as he built distance against the only one he knew to have range attacks, those throwing needles and knives. The other intruder shouted as he moved away. Shit, you know about the other Nomu. You've got to die. Big sis Magna, wait. Sis. Midoriya didn't pay it much attention but Magna tried to get in his way. A strange blue aura surrounded him as Magna focused on running away from Tiger while grabbing him before Spinner tackled Magna, forcing her to dodge the needle that nearly stabbed her in the throat. She would have survived, painfully. Once she was tackled her quirk was deactivated and Midoriya could freely run towards the cliffs again, unimpeded. Wraith breathed in and went full force, cracking the ground as he pushed off and disappeared into the depths of the forest to deal with the monsters. What was that for Spinner? He knows about the Nomu, he could fuck up everything if he knows too much. Magna looked over in confusion as Spinner helped her up until Spinner pointed to the needle embedded in a tree just behind her. If that hit her. You too, what is he doing here? He's not on the list. Spinner was genuinely worried now as he pointed at the two heroes, confused. He should not be here. Quote. Ken shouldn't be here. Ever since Ken swept by like the southern wind of destruction, Mandalay took this time to move Pixie Bob away from the fight and make sure she was alright. Now she exchanged confused glances as she backed to fight now that Ken was gone. He was a surprise teacher, after all. Tiger shrugged it off, not quite sure why the two knew each other. Both used swords so maybe it was a martial arts thing. In the distance, you could just make out a strange black mask slipping over Ken's head as he entered the forest, fully disappearing and rocketing away with inhumane speed. Even now Mandalay couldn't tell exactly what his quirk was. But he appeared to be moving towards Kota. Did that mean there were more monsters by Kota? Was he safe? She was trying to constantly contact him and bring him here, but that could be more distracting than it was helpful. If the Nomu were by Kota, that probably meant. She wouldn't think about that. In the best circumstances, Ken was lying seeing monsters over there just so he could run off and make sure Kota was alright. But that was just lying to herself. The villains had basically admitted there were more monsters and that Ken was headed in the right direction. All she could hope now was that he'd get there in time, but with how long the fight had been going. This was why she hated this quirk. It was all good for calming people down, but right now she needed to be calmed down. Ragdoll was Mia, Pixie Bob probably had a concussion, and she had no clue where Kota was. Even if her quirk was two-way it'd be miles better. Now she just had to rely on Ken. But Spinner seemed to know something about him by how worried he looked. Magna, whatever you do, avoid that guy. We can't beat him. Spinner was seriously scared but that just reaffirmed his commitment. We need to kill these fakes and get out of here. What, is he some secret top-tier hero? You fought him before. Magna picked up her magnet now and blew blood from her nose, ready to go another round now. No one's fought him twice except Stain, and he lost. Spinner had some inside information on that fight it seemed since the names were never released, but he seemed scared shitless now as he stared into the woods where Ken had gone. That guy's Musudafu's number 2 villain, the Ronin. Why is he here? The big monsters jumped and lumbered down the cliffs while a single large figure moseyed down, seeming to have a great time as he punted any of the monsters he deemed to slow off the cliff. Koda was sure if they lived, but he was positive the large man didn't care. He couldn't see the big man, or he couldn't see him directly, but he could hear the big man slowly walking down the path. He was usually laughing for a while before he'd suddenly hit something, then laugh even harder as he got closer. And he was always getting closer. Here, maybe. C.R. Guess not tilde. Koda didn't have a clue who this guy was or why he was here, but everything about him screamed villain. He might have hit those monsters, but he was the most monstrous one of all, laughing as he hit everything in his path. His steps made the ground shake as Koda curled up in a ball behind his rock. Tilde, I wonder where the little rat is hiding. The steps finally stopped and Koda could breathe easily for a second. The man hadn't stopped close to him, he was by the cliffside. Maybe he was about to jump down. Maybe. C.R. The rock Koda was hiding behind was crushed in a second as the big monster crossed 20 feet in a second, punting the rock so hard it was decimated before it could even go flying up. The big monster's leg was poised to crush Koda underfoot as he laughed. I should ask the rat myself. Chapter end notes. You Pixie Bob gets one shot. What a wimp. Bigger changes. In canon, Koda just sort of doesn't notice the fire until Muscular arrives, but we can see that the fire's already spread and covers a lot of ground by the time that happens. Canon Koda doesn't notice the fire despite his hideout being right over it and him staring in that direction presumably the entire time Dabi was starting the fire. Another thing, in canon, Mandalay doesn't know where Koda goes to hang out. On her own property, that they've been presumably living on for at least a while because this is land that they own, not just a hero place that they're staying at in addition to her having a teammate whose quirk lets her know where anyone within a certain large radius is. A Mandalay doesn't know where Koda goes to hang out, this is just fucking stupid. Like I'ma be rude, but Horikoshi wasn't thinking very hard when he made this arc. This part of the story was designed to do a few convoluted things, get Bakugo kidnapped and get Midoriya to rescue Koda. That's the logical reason why it had to happen in the middle of nowhere and why Mandalay is such a terrible adult. Like, not even a parent, this is just bad adulting. She is literally confirming everything he thinks about heroes and his family. What the fuck? Like, it's trying to send a positive message but Mandalay really confirms most of Koda's worries were real. How can you not know where a single child goes after being stuck with him presumably all summer? You only needed to ask Ragdoll once, or just take the simple option and fucking follow him but no. Man, I hate this arc. I'm sorry, I'll step off. I had a very time writing this arc because as stated above, I don't like it and find it very forced. This means if I want my story to follow the original's flow, I have to either go with the original flow of very forced or make my own. For example, how Mandalay doesn't know where her nephew spends his days, or how Bakugo doesn't one-shot Moonfish because he totally Ragdoll was supposed to see the locations of everyone within a mile even if she didn't know who they were. Why didn't she radio in? Did she help the League get in? Really, it was all irrelevant. Midoriya tried to blot out these kinds of thoughts and just focused on his last good deed for a long time. It seemed Ronin's retirement came early since the camp definitely wasn't going to continue after this shitshow. He would have enjoyed spending a little more time with Kaminari. He liked the young aspiring hero even if his heroic motivations weren't very heroic. Kaminari's drive and determination made up for his scatterbrain in Midoriya's eyes. He'd never be the smartest person in the world, but he was trying his best, and wasn't that what they were all doing? No, that's what they had once done. But that was a long time ago now. Midoriya grimaced, then shook his head. He was going to try his best now, even if it made him a villain. Wraith drew Yamato out early as they approached the Nomu, cutting through a mess of tentacles and chopping 3 arms off in a single swing before rebounding off a tree, turning all their momentum completely backward and stabbing the Nomu through the back. He then pushed off the Nomu's body while tearing Yamato out, severing its body almost but not entirely in half, which was arguably messier as its torso hung barely attached to its spine, collapsing while they continued. He'd finish the job even if he didn't like it, even if he didn't get to do what he wanted. And what exactly was it that he wanted? He said earlier to make the world a better place, and they were going to make it a better place. He should be overjoyed that they had such a simple plan to do it, and yet he wasn't. Instead, here he was, running through the forest and carving up things that looked like they crawled right out of horror stories while second-guessing everything. What a great night to be stuck with the world's worst heroes in the middle of fucking nowhere. The Nomus swarmed Wraith, coming in from a variety of directions on unconventional paths and slowing them down. The Nomus were definitely faster than them and by a noticeable amount. Wraith usually could take them down because they weren't paying attention and couldn't think, but when they got going. One Nomu ran forward on 4 legs, charging him as quickly as possible before it randomly stopped dead, grabbing a tree with one arm and ripping the trunk off as it hurtled the mass of wood towards him. At the same time a second Nomu followed his path, leaping from tree to tree before bursting in from above and diving down at him, taking out his ability to dodge by going upward. And from the side the third and final Nomu snaked along the ground, slithering along without legs but still moving with alarming speed. It had 2 heads like some kind of discount Hydria, both heads snapping as they circled around him to cut off any attempts to escape by moving to the side. Wraith didn't just attack, that would tire himself out and probably get him hit. Yamato could cut anything after all, but it couldn't block everything. He needed to dodge the attack and then counter it when his body was safe. If he was denied that dodge, the best he could do was exchange wounds. Wraith took in all 3 attacks quickly and made his decision. Instead of trying to take them all head-on, he'd have to take them head-on. That could have been phrased better. Wraith didn't try to avoid the thrown tree, he ran into it as he grabbed the still-sheathed Yamato to hold it in place as he tucked his body in and rolled underneath the tree trunk, letting it soar harmlessly over his head. If he didn't grab Yamato it might have stuck out and gotten caught on something while he rolled, or be out of position for his next attack like this. The second Nomu crashed into the ground where he was supposed to be along with the fallen tree, unable to adjust midair and completely missing its target. The 2-headed snake Nomu, however, was still adjusting and chasing. Now their prey was between the 3 of them, so it couldn't dodge the snake Nomu moved straight towards him as he rose from his dodge, letting it get as close as possible before standing completely and performing a drawing cut. The snake had charged with open jaws, intent to bite into him to probably poison him, and instead got a mouthful of steel as Yamato sliced through both heads, cutting their skulls in half from ear to ear. The snake's body slid to a crashing halt as Wraith sidestepped and started to run through the forest, going into the trees to build height and relocate the cliffs while the other 2 Nomus took after him. Once he was sure of his direction he dropped back down onto the unsuspecting Nomu stupid enough to try and climb the same tree as him, plunging Yamato into its eye and then tearing its head apart but pulling the blade sideways instead of straight out. Brains and blood splattered as Wraith fell onto the Nomu, knocking it off the tree and onto the now rockier terrain as they got closer to the cliffs and the trees began to thin out. It screamed and flailed, but Wraith was more concerned with the next Nomu than the dying wails of a corpse. It was already dead, nothing could save it. It just had to accept its fate, just like the last Nomu. The final Nomu, or technically the first Nomu since it was the one that had been throwing things, charged again as it lobbed a rock the size of Wraith towards the swordsman. It sailed through the air, drawing his attention up while it stayed close to the ground and dashed towards him. It was a two-pronged attack, forcing him to react to two attacks nearly simultaneously. Both moved much faster than he could, but neither was faster than he could react to. Both attacks moved in a straight easy-to-predict line, proving why Nomu were such easy victims. Their only threat was in numbers or power. In a one-on-one fight, Wraith was basically a god compared to them. Even a trick like this was, at the end of the day, just a trick. And now the sun had set. Wraith charged the Nomu with both hands on Yamato, but his eyes were set on the cliffs behind it. For whatever they were approaching, for whatever the weakling wanted, they would be there soon. Chapter end notes. Yo, what a short chapter. Everything about this is gonna be short, so let's hop to it. Somebody, you can't just release a short chapter just so you can keep your streak of one a day going. This is smaller than some of your notes. Me, you writ. Long story short, this chapter is short as fuck for a lot of dumb reasons. First, thematically it made more sense to build up to the next big fight, because a sudden big fight is jarring and weird even if we know it happened in canon. I don't just want to throw the viewers into a mess, we work our way up slowly. Yes, I do this every fight so far, I'm sorry. Stain had the random Nomus, Kaminari and Najire-chan had their failed fights, and Mao had the ass-whooping round. Sorry, this is how I've learned to write fighting, I'll change it up in a later arc. Second, I want to keep a streak going. Dumb reason and I'm not going to do it for long, but I want to try to keep the pace fast because I can and, unfortunately for me, school is starting soon and I have a goal with where I want this story to be by then. So, fast releases. Third, pacing. The fight wouldn't have felt right to start it in the last quarter of a chapter, so it's not going to start this chapter. It's not that I don't have time to write it in this chapter, it's just a coincidence that I don't have time to write it in this chapter and keep the streak going, I swear. In my unprofessional opinion, since most of this chapter is dedicated to just getting to the cliffs, fighting Nomu, and internally discussing the situation, a fourth and fifth development like Koda and fighting Muscular would have made this chapter messy. Almost as messy as these notes, and maybe even half as messy as this exit. Chapter 143, The Beginning. Chapter Summary. Running in the forest, it's like running in the 90s except it's not at all. Chapter Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. The second Nomu was kicked headfirst into a tree, staggering it as it grabbed at its exposed brain and stumbled backward while screaming before both tree and Nomu were sliced in half in one stroke. The fourth Nomu crushed both halves of the second underhoof as it charged, ramming straight through the trees and every obstacle in its way as it chased the fleeting shadow that killed so many of them. Wraith didn't make a sound as he flew through the air, rebounding off of anything and everything as he built distance, disappearing from sight every time the fourth got close enough to crush him just to reappear slightly ahead as he continued running. Wraith disappeared again as another Nomu, the third, swooped down from the sky and nearly grabbed him out of the air, hitting just to the left of where he was with its claws. Wraith pushed off of the bat-like Nomu, moving towards the ground and running along it before he suddenly took back to the air, narrowing avoiding another charge from the fourth Nomu. This kind of fighting was difficult but mindless. It was chaotic and difficult to keep track of at the moment too. While dealing with so many threats from so many directions was challenging, it wasn't impossible. It just required quick reflexes and, if your reflexes were good enough, nothing else. It didn't take much thought anymore as Wraith danced between the Nomu, returning their attacks with much smaller sword strikes as he picked away at them, giving them minor injuries like severing a wing or slicing off a leg before he went in for the kill. As long as he stayed aware of his surroundings and was ready, fighting two Nomu would be no trouble at all. It was hard to put to words, this strange blend of thrill and boredom. Wraith felt as second Nomu's horns brushed past his left shoulder, clomping past on hooves as it crushed stone and wood underneath itself easily. In retaliation for this minor brushing, Yamato flew across Wraith's body and chopped into the Nomu's body, sliding through the hide and muscle like it was thin air. But this counterstrike didn't kill the Nomu, it barely even seemed to notice the wound as it continued charging, the injury being more annoying than seriously damaging. The second the portal lines turned into a real wound, the wound began to close as the Nomu's regeneration kicked in. That regeneration was part of the problem. Combined with the numbers Wraith had seen so far and the average Nomu's incredible durability, the only shot that did anything to a Nomu was a kill shot. You couldn't slowly stab them to death or weather them down, it had to be an all-in-one attack that ended them quickly before they could recover. Now, an all-in-one kill shot wasn't difficult most of the time. That was almost any attack that hit the brain unless you were incredibly unlucky and managed to accidentally avoid striking anything vital, and with their brains exposed it became even easier. It was their rapid speed and numbers that made it difficult. To prove his point for him, not even a single second after sticking his sword into the monstrous the fourth Nomu, the third Nomu swept down again for another try at killing him, screaming as its quirk made everything that hurt it instinctively tense up and move slower. This played into the third Nomu's own rapid speed as it went straight for the now slowed and weakened Wraith. Even if by accident, these things covered for each other by not giving him the time to properly kill them, disrupting him with a constant downpour of attacks. They were fast and chaotic, meaning it required all his attention to put down one. It was extremely difficult as he straddled the line between attacking and defending, between killing and being killed. But killing these things wasn't just difficult, it was also brain dead easy at the same time, and trying to figure out what that phrase meant was much harder than fighting these animals. Instead of backing down or trying to run away now that he was slowed down, Wraith kept his eyes trained on the bat Nomu swooping down and crouched slightly. His muscles were tense from the Nomu's scream, as intended, but that didn't matter. He was slower than the Nomu's to begin with, so being even slower wasn't too much of an issue if he could still set up his counters in time. As the Nomu lurched down, Wraith pointed Yamato at the Nomu and put his body behind the blade, leaning into the attack to better brace for the impact. The bat's hind legs or claws, whatever they were, swung forward and tried to latch onto Wraith, wrapping around his body as the bat dived headfirst into Yamato, knocking them both down and sending them across the ground. The problem with these Nomus was simple. They were dumb as fuck. Not a single shred of self-preservation as they charged forward, almost as eager to kill themselves as they were their opponents, like how they could miss an entire sword pointed at their eye socket and happily charge into their own deaths. The bat in death was more effective at causing damage to Wraith than it had been in life, its corpse slamming into him and making him hit himself in the ribs with Yamato as he was pushed backward, barely managing to keep his feet under himself and stay standing, like a man resisting a stormy ocean's waves. Wraith took several steps back as he tried to stop the corpse's momentum as it slammed him into and then through a tree. Hitting that tree was the most damage Wraith had taken during this entire worthless trip. He recollected himself, attempting first to step out from underneath the bat Nomu's convulsing corpse before his attention shifted and he was forced to act faster, leaping back several feet as the fourth Nomu, the goat thing, trampled through both the tree and bat all in an attempt to crush him. The goat Nomu couldn't suddenly adjust its direction though and careened past harmlessly, although you wouldn't be able to tell by listening. It screamed and roared as it crashed through more objects, finally beginning to slow down so it could turn and take another crack at cracking him. Seriously though, why the hell did All for One make a goat Nomu? Of all the things to make into a Nomu, a goat. Really, did they run out of competent animals or was All for One just curious about how bad this one was going to be? Pushing thoughtless wonders aside, Wraith stepped close to the fourth Nomu as it came to a complete stop and began turning, its eyes bloodshot as it looked frantically for its target before. SSSHLICK. A katana was not a good stabbing weapon by any stretch of the imagination, but not good was good enough as Wraith rammed the sword up to its hilt into the Nomu's eye socket and out the other end, twisting it slightly as he withdrew the blade and leapt back to avoid the death spasms. That was the last one for now. He had to kill so many Nomus here he made a clearing in the forest with how many trees they all broke. Yamato was having a rough night. It was a lot of work for one sword to do so much, after all, and unlike a certain weakling, it was pulling its weight. Wraith flicked the blood off and ran Yamato between parts of his coat like a cleaning rag to wipe off more of the blood, then turned and took off running from the clearing made by the rampages and deaths of the 6 now deceased Nomus. This was going to be a long night. Wraith worked his way through the woods and finally emerged from the woods to find the largest collection of Nomu so far. 7 Nomu were at the bottom of Kota's cliff, and there were more of them higher up on the cliff. Just taking the 7 Nomu on the ground at once was going to be dicey, even by Wraith's standards. It was trivially easy to take one Nomu down, like how he could just walk up to the goat Nomu and stab it through the eyes whenever he felt like, since Nomus on their own had the tactical planning of a car crash and left giant openings he could take advantage of. Even 2 Nomus at once wasn't so bad, he'd just monitor one and when they split up too far he'd treat it like a one-on-one fight. The problem started at 3. These Nomus were so fast and attacked so constantly that he didn't have time to deal large blows against them easily in just groups of 3 since at least one of them would always be trying to kill him at any given second. That was why he had to kill the bat off its own attack. 7 was a tall order. If he could split them up this would be easier, but the Nomu were so loud that was basically impossible. Plus, there were more up higher on the cliffs. If those spotted him they'd rush down to attack him and bring all the Nomu to him at once, and even he wasn't sure how many were up in those cliffs. Every and any way you look at it, this was going to be tricky. And right after they made the cheap joke about Nomus using stupid tricks too. At least no one heard that. Midoriya looked at the Nomus briefly to try and get a clue for what quirks they had, but no dice. They were all mostly humanoid with their animal aspects being secondary. If he was to hazard a guess, the humanoid Nomus instinctively stuck together while the animal Nomus instinctively ran rampant, charging off into the forest. It seemed that even Nomus had levels of organization and groups, even if only subconsciously. The first Nomu they saw at the camp was the one by the pussycats and the students, that one had been human and was way further out than any of the other Nomus they'd seen. There were probably multiple Nomus with League of Villain members acting as spare muscle, meaning there were a few Nomus still at the camp if there had been more intruders than just the lizard guy and his friend. The Nomus still seemed to have some vague motor skills and instincts from their past lives. The humanoid ones knew how to punch, the animals knew how to hunt, but it seemed using advanced skills was beyond them. They usually had ones that worked with whatever they naturally did, making them relatively simple fighters with no large gimmicks. The humanoid Nomus probably could use whatever their base quirk was in addition to the ones they'd been given, making them slightly more versatile and smart. This was making the humanoid Nomus sound like they were better in every way to animalistic Nomus. That would be because, for the most part, they were. The only thing the animals had over the humans was instincts. The animals were much more vicious, attacking without needing to be told. They were practically screaming for blood. But that made them predictable, so the human Nomus were still better. And now they had to fight at least 7. At once. This was going to be a long night. They rushed straight in, moving towards what looked like the strongest Nomu with Yamato still sheathed. The Nomus barely recognized or registered him at first, their brains reacting so slow that they couldn't realize what was happened right under their noses. Wraith pushed off a tree as he completely left the forest and charged into the brief open space between forest and cliffs where the Nomus were lumbering, some of them still standing up. It looked like they recently got there, so maybe they fell off the cliffs. Wraith silently skipped past 2 Nomu and straight towards the one he thought looked the strongest, a huge thing with 4 arms and skin like a suit of armor. It blinked at him as he closed the distance, moving all the way from the forest to the Nomu and covering 40 meters in 2 seconds. These Nomus had the physical reaction speed to hit him and kill him in a single hit. The problem with Nomu was that it was so incredibly stupid it didn't realize it was even being attacked until Yamato was shot out of its sheath with a bullet, cleaving straight through the skull in a single hit without the giant oaf even trying to dodge. 3 seconds in and, finally, the Nomu realized that instead of attacking they were being attacked and sprang to life. Immediately their lumbering motions as they waited for orders vanished as all 6 remaining Nomu started to chase after Wraith. Wraith kicked off the giant's body, using it as a starting block to get a good run back to the forest and back to safety. Most of his style of speed came from pushing off objects, meaning he had a disadvantage in large open areas like the one the Nomus had been hanging out in, so it better played to his strengths to go back to the woods for this fight. It also was better to go out into unfavorable terrain to kill one Nomu easily and risk getting spotted by multiple Nomu, since the alternative was trying to lure the Nomus into the forest and that still risked getting spotted by multiple Nomu. After going into the forest, they could either ditch the Nomus or lead the Nomus to someone else. The Nomus probably weren't supposed to attack League members, but with intelligence and track record of flattening each other, Wraith totally believed the Nomus would accidentally squash anyone not fast enough to outrun them. And one last thing before he got into this seriously, weapons. Wraith was still using Yamato despite having a pair of pistols, a cannonbow, and a multifunctioning quarterstaff because Yamato was the strongest in almost every conceivable way. By leaps and bounds, none of the other weapons came close. The pistols were only useful when they had bullets to amp up their power, but that would involve reloading and Wraith barely had any free time to kill something, let alone reload a weapon. The polearms would get in the way of his parkour, so they were also a no-go. Some of the other minor weapons he had like the grenades and needles could be useful, like the fragmentation grenades the beast had stolen, but it was better to save those for a rainy day. The needles were just too weak to do anything reliably and were more for annoying an enemy than taking it in a serious fight. This is why Wraith had the displeasure of running away from 6 Nomu with a sword in his hand that he couldn't really use at the moment. The Nomu didn't stay still long enough for him to use the slash dimension, so he'd have to take them out in single strikes which meant setting up more kill shots. Wraith kept an eye on the Nomus as they split up, each taking their own slightly different approaches to try and kill him. Some came from above, some came from the sides, and some charged straight at him. It didn't matter. He took to the trees as usual, jumping between them to create his own erratic movement and throw them off. He forced the Nomus to follow his pace, to enter his world, and to play his game. That way, he could best control himself. Then, he could control the terrain. And when you controlled yourself in the area, you could control the enemy. And that was how you won. Two of the Nomus crashed into each other as they tried to chase him up a tree, and one lucky participant got a free sword facial as Midoriya jumped down again. This was the third time they had done that trick tonight, but it meant he could only take out one of the two Nomus. Yamato didn't have enough reach and he wasn't fast enough to hit both Nomus in one fall. So that left one Nomu still alive and still wanting to punt off Midoriya's head, and the Nomu was fast enough to do it. That Nomu had, however, just crashed and forgot to get up before it attacked, giving Midoriya the little leg up he needed to escape. This was why they tended to kill Nomus as soon as they saw them. Nomu physically outclassed them in every way. In Hosu City they used Slash Dimension to kill 4 Nomus before the ugly bastards could even get within 20 feet of him, making sure they didn't have a chance of hitting him back. Most top league pro heroes were a lot faster than him, like Nomus, so they could just keep pace with the things and go toe-to-toe. Both also didn't have much planning behind their movements though, so Midoriya and Wraith could keep up by planning in advance what the heroes or Nomus were going to do and reacting in advance. But that depended on the number of people they had to predict, which created the trouble he was having with these 5 Nomu after his falling kill and initial kill. It took 30 seconds just to kill that one and 2 more Nomu had come off the cliff and joined the fray, bringing their total Nomu count back up to the original number of 7. It was like he didn't even kill any of them yet. It could be worse. Technically if they hadn't gotten that rush kill at the start and that falling kill just there, they'd be dealing with 9 Nomus right now. No, wait, there was no real optimistic way to look at this. This was still shit. Shit. Wraith grit his teeth, cursed in his heart of hearts, wondered what the fuck heart of hearts meant, and got to work. He weaved through the trees as the Nomus crashed through everything, making a mess as they confused themselves and each other while helping him build that distance he needed to get a good hit off. He checked everyone's positions, nodding to himself. 9 humanoid Nomus, a tougher threat than anything he'd ever taken on before, but he could do take 9 Nomus on. Scurry. Then the 10th Nomu swooped down from God knows where, striking from above as it tore through the forest and swooped in front of him, blocking his current route and forcing him to change plans. Shit. Midoriya took in the sight as the winged Nomu swooped down, crashing into and crushing the trees. Unlike the bad Nomu earlier, this thing had arms, legs, and wings, so it was still a humanoid type. It seemed to be at least a little smarter than the usual ones since it had tried cutting him off, but that just put it in his line of fire instead of actually stopping him. The plans did change as that flying Nomu bumped itself up to the top of the hit list, but the route did not. Wraith continued running straight forward, hopping up to the tops of the trees to reach the Nomu's elevation and fight on equal terms. Its flapping motions made its height a little unsteady as it tried to stay level with him, screaming before diving straight at him. Branches and limbs snapped off on its body to foreshadow what would happen if their bodies collided. Behind him were more Nomus, jumping up to try and chase him through the treetops. They climbed and clambered up the nearby trees as they chased, trying to get as close as possible so they could tear him apart, and accidentally putting themselves in the way of the flying Nomu. Wraith didn't bother trying to stab the new flying Nomu in the head, that thing was too large and moving too fast. He could definitely try to, but if he did he was going to get body slammed by its corpse again and then get torn apart by the Nomus behind him if the initial impact didn't kill him. So he took the lazier option and used that verticality he built up to make an easy getaway. Wraith rushed straight at the flying Nomu until the very last second, when he purposely fell off the tree and dropped like a stone, flying underneath the new Nomu as it sailed over his head and crashed into some of the other Nomus. Wraith rolled to a stop back on the ground and took a look at his handiwork, inspecting the Nomus as they worked to untangle themselves and trying to find his next target. One Nomu on its own. No, it was still moving. Ah, a pair of Nomu who were both down. Wraith closed the distance to the duo and began slicing as they both struggled to get up, carving straight through one and hitting it in the head while the other only lost most of both arms and the side of its face before the force of Nomus recollected themselves and forced Wraith to go back to running away. It didn't seem like much since he didn't get to kill that second Nomu, but now it was much weaker while it regenerated and would likely fall behind. It was things like that which helped thin the herd for him and set up future kills. They just had to keep planning ahead and... A long tendril grabbed the tree he had tried to jump on and uprooted it, sending him flying into the air and ruining all those plans he was talking about. Shit. The Nomu saw him flying through the air, helpless and unable to change his direction without something to kick off, and prove they were at least smart enough to try and take advantage of his moment of weakness. Several of the Nomus jumped into the air to try and grab him. Wraith refocused as he spun through the air and locked back onto the incoming Nomus. He'd gotten sloppy and wasn't paying attention to where he'd been going, now he was paying the price for his idiocy. 5 Nomus were hurtling through the air. Their limbs extended as they tried to get closer and get a hold of him. He couldn't dodge their attacks since he was stuck mid-air, so he'd just have to break through them. Wraith resheathed Yamato, keeping a careful eye on the arms before performing the explosive drawing cut, slicing several limbs off in a single attack. The explosion gave him the power and speed he needed to cut through several arms at once and cover a large distance in a single swing, defending himself. Without the arms to grab him, their bodies harmlessly less dangerously crashed into him and changed his momentum. Wraith continued slicing, using their bodies as a surface to jump off of as he avoided their limbs and flails as he carved them to pieces using the portal function. He didn't turn the white lines covering their bodies into wounds yet, since that would activate their regeneration. He instead kept cleaving until he was sure he got a few headshots. He'd only need 2 or 3 to majorly turn this around. Scurry. And then the 10th Nomu swooped in once again to fuck everything up, flying in from behind Midoriya while he wasn't paying attention and body checking him, sending him flying across the forest as his body skipped like a stone across the trees before crashing and rolling to a stop on stony ground. Wraith was too tired to keep complaining, and his spine hurt way too much. Between this and getting hit through a tree, he was having a rough night. Wraith looked up, making sure he still had Yamato and it was still in one piece after that last big hit. It had a few scratches from this mess but was mostly fine. It'd have to be. Wraith got his feet underneath him and jumped backward as the flying Nomu swooped down, then pushed up and off a tree as another Nomu tried to tackle him. Next, he moved from tree to tree as more Nomus charged into the clearing they were all making, demolishing trees like they were cardboard props and taking away more of his escape options. Wraith recollected himself as he took in the scenery properly before trying to do anything. He'd gotten greedy and messed up. This was going to be rough, no matter how they looked at it. Wraith ran up a Nomu's body and jumped from the Nomu to a nearby tree just as another Nomu clobbered the first in an effort to hit him. They were going to run, break off this fight and build distance. Then they'd create a new favorable circumstance and restart the fight, trying to take on a smaller number, probably dealing with the faster Nomu first and then circling back to deal with the slower ones. Wraith jumped over a charging Nomu, jumping off its back to gain a little more height as he latched onto a tree, then rebounded off of it a second before a new Nomu tackled the same point on the tree he'd just been, then copying his rebound as the new Nomu jumped off the tree towards him. He let the Nomu get close, waiting as long as possible before he purposely got closer to it and kicked off it right as the flying Nomu swept back in and knocked the chasing Nomu into next week with a single hit. Now Wraith looked down from the air, taking it all in. The Nomus were starting to get confused from his constant acrobatics below him, the flying Nomu was circling back around above him, and not one of the Nomus were dead. I wonder where the little rat is hiding. Maybe I should ask the rat myself. Who was that? Wraith turned midair, confused at who else was this far from the action without bothering to join in. And what did they mean by the rat? A large figure was standing on the cliff, shouting so loudly that even Midoriya could hear him from the 60 or so meters they were from each other. He was facing away from Midoriya, laughing at something. This was just distracting him. It didn't matter overall, he'd just keep in mind that there was someone at the cliffs and avoid them. Besides, it didn't take a genius to know that a child would be killed in almost an instant by all these Nomu. This at least helped him plan his escape route. He'd move away from the cliffs and deeper into the forest. Probably towards the forest fire, use that and the Nomu's recklessness to cause some easy free damage. H help. It wasn't loud, he could barely hear it over the screams and wind. Hell, he wasn't even sure he heard anything as he took a quick second glance at the cliffs. Just beyond the large man, slowly backing away while trapped against the cliffs. No, Wraith deliberately turned the other way, focusing instead on the numerous problems they already had. He jumped off of a Nomu's head and slid down its back as he finally touched down on the treetops again, moving in a quick circle as a Nomu lunged to cut him off. I tried searching for somewhere with a nice view, and I ended up finding a little rat not on the list. The large man laughed as he stepped back, deliberately crossing his arms and not moving as Kota kept stumbling backward, unsure of what to do. Hey, by the way, you've got a nice hat there, kid. They couldn't hear what he said next, but Kota finally found his legs and ran away. Good for him. Oh, hey. Something interesting finally happened over by Kota as the large man seemed to teleport with how quickly he moved, jumping around Kota and hitting the cliffside so hard he shattered it. The large man could somehow move at a speed similar to All Might. He was still slower, but since being the strongest was the only thing All Might had going for him, it was interesting to see. Almost as interesting as paying attention. Kota might be alive now, but he was clearly going to die in a few seconds. That was just how the world worked. He was alive right now though. He was lucky to be alive right now and was only alive because the large man was toying with him. The large man was done toying around now and was a much bigger threat than any of these idiotic Nomu. They should start to build distance before that man finished killing Kota. They weren't just going to let Kota die, they supposed to bank on it. Rely on the fact that Kota was going to die if they didn't do anything. Yes, because it was the safest option. The large man flexed his arm and something red overtook it, probably him activating his quirk. He likely did the same thing on his legs before he jumped around Kota. Come on. The large man was smiling as he stepped forward, something falling away from his face. Midoriya wasn't sure what it was as he danced over a Nomu, ramming a needle into its eye as he prepared to turn away. Papa, Mama. They saw Kota's face, just for a second. His angry expression was gone, replaced by sheer terror and sadness as the child cried, frozen by emotions. That expression reminded him of himself, from a long time ago, and vaguely of a burning street. Wraith shook his head. They had made the right call. The large man was over 40 meters up a cliff from the edge of the forest, and they weren't even at the edge. There was no way they could reach the criminal or Kota in time. Even if they did reach them, what were they going to do? Tank the hit instead of Kota and get their head punched off, and then Kota died anyway. Wraith sheathed Yamato so they could have both hands open as they ran away. Their guns wouldn't be able to deal any real damage to someone who could break stone just by moving without bullets, and Kota would be dead by the time they switched magazines.